Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Case 1. The Zodiac Killer is one of the most mysterious and deadly criminals to have emerged from the latter half of the 20th century. Over the years since his killing spree ended, many names have been put forward as possible leads in the case. One of the more promising suspects was Lawrence Kane, who has been linked to several different murders associated with the Zodiac case. He has often been cited as a strong suspect for being the elusive serial killer, and most of the information about Kane can be found in a report compiled by retired police officer Harvey Hines, who cites many similarities and traits between Kane and the Zodiac. However, with mostly circumstantial evidence pointing to his guilty, Kane was never charged with any crimes relating to the murders, but he has remained one of the prime suspects. Born on April 29, 1924 in Brooklyn, New York as Lawrence Larry Klein, the eldest of 3 sons to Morris Hyam Klein and Sarah Benjamin. Both of his brothers would die in infancy, leaving him as an only child, and he grew up in a working-class Jewish neighborhood in Brooklyn's Borough Park district. During his teenage years, his parents divorced, and 13-year-old Klein went to live with his mother. On September 13, 1941, at the age of 17, when he left New York, he submitted an application to the Social Security Board requesting that his name be changed from Lawrence Klein to Lawrence K. During the last weekend in March 1942, K was arrested along with 14 other young men, who were collectively described by Lakewood police officers as hotel workers and drifters. They were charged with drunkenness and disorderly conduct. Larry K was fined $5 in costs. He formed a strong dependency on his mother, and she was equally dependent upon him. His military record shows that he worked as a master of ceremonies for several hotels and nightclubs before being admitted to the United States Naval Reserve. He served for 7 months in the U.S. Naval Reserve, and his military records would indicate he had a strong attachment to his mother, which caused him to behave indifferently towards other women. K was honorably discharged from the military in 1943 after a diagnosis of psychoneurosis hysteria was made. It was reported that his illness stemmed from a deep worry he felt over his unstable and often infirmed mother. At the end of World War II, K married Eileen Phyllis Barton on July 7, 1945. Barton was an American singer who was best known for her 1950 hit song, "If I Knew You Were Comin', IDV Baked a Cake." At the time of their marriage, she had her own radio program, Teen Timers, which was changed to The Eileen Barton Show in November 1945 and was broadcast Saturday mornings on NBC. On August 5, 1945, K was involved in a car accident along with 4 other Brooklyn residents. He told police he was driving south on Boulevard East and had been forced to the left side of the road by another car. His car was badly damaged and had only been saved from going over the cliff because of the guardrail. It was reported in August 1946 that K's wife Eileen threatened to elope with him unless her family consented to the marriage. Later that year in October, K was involved in another motoring incident when he was accused along with 2 other men of beating up 2 pedestrians who bawled at them. The victims were almost run down whilst crossing Vine Street in New York, and the 3 men were arrested and faced a $40,000 damage suit. All 3 were released on $250 bail pending the trial. In September 1947, 23-year-old K was arrested on charges of conspiracy and fraud in what was described as a sales defraudment. Both men would be acquitted of the charges. He faced further problems with the law when in August 1949, when he was charged with grand larceny in Albany after absconding with $600 paid on a siding contract. The charges were later dismissed. In June 1952, he participated in the burglary of a residence in Manhattan, in what was possibly his most high-profile crime so far. At this time, 28-year-old K was living at 400 East 57th Street as an unemployed shingle salesman. He was described by police as a man about town, who knew many people in show business. One of these people was the singer Johnny Johnston, who was engaged to married divorcee Mrs. Shirley Carmel, who had a Manhattan apartment. Johnston had introduced Carmel to K during Christmas 1951, and had seen him several times thereafter. She would later report the theft of $17,000 in jewelry from her apartment. Witnesses reported seeing a flashy yellow convertible near the scene of the crime. This car belonged to K, and soon enough he surrendered himself at the East 5th Street precinct, bringing with him $6,000 in stolen jewelry. He claimed her did so because he learned that detectives were closing in on him, but he refused to name his accomplice, who he said was a tall blonde stranger he met in an East Side bar. 23-year-old Harold Leskowitz was later arrested in May 1953 for involvement in the burglary, and both would be tried for the crime, with Kay being given a suspended sentence in January 1954. Kay remarried in December 1959 to Ethel Marie Brown in New Orleans. He was arrested in October 1961 on charge of voyeurism and being a peeping Tom under the California Lewd Vagrancy Act, and fined $105. The following year, in May 1962, he was involved in a vehicle accident in San Mateo, California. He received extensive brain damage and began suffering from seizures from 1965 onwards, and was allegedly diagnosed by a psychologist as losing the ability to control self-gratification. In 1964, his driver's license was revoked due to unspecified traffic violations, but he was able to obtain one fraudulently throughout the subsequent years. Kay, who was by now using the name Lawrence Kane, would be described as an egotist by acquaintances and those knew him, as well as a loner, deceitful, and a con artist. His neighbors did not know what he did, and described how he continuously kept his window blinds down. From 1968 until 1979, Kane changed his life around, and was reportedly not arrested for any crimes during that time period. But given his history, it was unusual for him to abruptly stop committing petty crimes. It has been suggested that Kane was committing far more serious crimes and did not want his activity to come to the attention of law enforcement. There is a wealth of evidence, both circumstantial and established fact, that connects Lawrence Kane to the Zodiac crimes. His criminal records show he was arrested in August 1968 in Redwood City on peeping Tom charges, roughly 4 months before the first Bay Area killings. His general appearance at the peak of the Zodiac murders matched that of the killer. 45-year-old Kane stood at 5'9", weighed approximately 160 pounds, and had dark hair and wore glasses, which was similar to the description given by witnesses. The Zodiac once mentioned in one of his letters that he looked different when he did his thing, and Kane possessed an uncanny ability of changing his appearance and looking different in his various known photographs. The images on 2 of his driving licenses appear to be different people, but upon closer inspection, they are clearly Kane. Whilst in the military, Kane received training at the Radio Material School, where he would have learned a basic knowledge of coding messages. It has been strongly suspected the Zodiac may have also had training in military codes, because he employed them within his letters in the form of ciphers to encrypt his secret messages to the authorities. On April 20th, 1970, the Zodiac sent a letter which contained a cipher that would apparently reveal the killer's name if decoded. Hines has put forward his theory that the cipher contains the surname Kane. However, without the key, it is impossible to decode the cipher and know for certain if the Zodiac revealed his real name. The Zodiac's handwriting has been one clue that has remained consistent throughout his many letters to the media. If the killer were ever caught, it would be easy to match his distinctive handwriting to a potential suspect. Kane's handwriting has been studied in an attempt to match it to Zodiac, but according to Hines' report, experts were unable to eliminate Kane as a suspect. Similarly, 3 handwriting experts in Oregon and Idaho could not rule out Kane as a Zodiac suspect because of his handwriting. Captain Roy Conway was told by one expert that Kane's handwriting looks good when compared to the Bay Area killer. Numerous fingerprints were left by the Zodiac on both letters and at some crime scenes. However, none of these were ever linked to Lawrence Kane. These prints may not have been left by the killer, who possibly wore gloves to reduce the amount of evidence for police to find. His close attachment to his mother and his inability to maintain a normal relationship with any other women could be seen as a motive in his crimes against couples and his anger at society as a whole. Whilst his sudden lack of criminal activity during the years the Zodiac was killing leaves many unanswered questions, considering his mental deterioration after his 1962 car accident and previous propensity for criminal activity. Kane has been linked to the murder of Darlene Ferrin, the Zodiac's 5th victim. Her sisters, Pam Huckabee and Linda Bowman, both claim it was Kane who had been following 22-year-old Darlene in the months before her murder, and both identified him from a picture lineup as the older person who their sister was afraid of and told people she saw him kill someone. Kane traded his car for a goldish-tan colored 1969 Ambassador 5 days after Darlene was murdered, and Michael Mageau would have given his statement to investigators about the man who shot them. At the time of the murder of cab driver Paul Stein, Kane lived in San Francisco at 217 Eddy Street, which is the Clark Hotel located approximately 2.5 city blocks from where Stein picked up the Zodiac the night he was murdered. That night the Zodiac fled from Cherry and Washington streets into the Presidio in the direction of Letterman General Hospital, where Donna Lass had been working as a nurse. Kane himself has been suspected of involvement in the disappearance of Lass, whose murder was alluded to in the alleged Zodiac's postcard of March 22, 1971. At the time of her death, Lass lived in the 4400 block of Balboa Street, which was around 6 blocks from where Stein was killed. On March 23, 1970, 23-year-old Kathleen Jones and her infant daughter were given a ride by a stranger on Highway 132 in San Joaquin County. The man sabotaged John's car before offering to take her to the nearest gas station, but instead subjected her to a terrifying ordeal, during which she feared for her life and that of her child. She described the suspect's vehicle as a medium-sized tan-colored sedan, similar to Kane's. On January 24, 1992, Kathleen Johns identified Lawrence Kane from an 18-picture lineup as the man who abducted her and her daughter. The Zodiac would boast in one of his letters of taking a woman and her child on a terrifying 2-hour ride before burning her vehicle. In June 1970, Kane left San Francisco and moved to South Lake Tahoe, around the same time as Donna Lass, who was murdered 4 months after moving to there. Lass was also working as the hotel nurse in the Sahara Tahoe Hotel Casino in South Lake Tahoe. At the same time, Kane was working for Alan Dorfman selling Arizona real estate. His office was in the Sahara Tahoe Hotel Casino, was down the hallway from Lass nurse's station. Co-workers would confirm that Kane and Lass knew each other. Once again, people who knew him claimed he was secretive and guarded in his dealings with other people, and was incapable of forming a normal adult relationship, possibly even homosexual. According to the Nevada Division of Real Estate, Kane moved to Las Vegas in 1971 and resided in the La Fonda Apartments on Spring Mountain Road. On April 27, 1974, 15-year-old Dana Lull, a Las Vegas high school sophomore, and her 21-year-old boyfriend Roy Top High were parked up in a secluded scenic spot in the Red Rock Canyon area of Las Vegas. At some point another car drove up and the occupant approached the couple, ordering Dana out of the car at gunpoint and removing the keys from their car. Lull's male companion managed to escape, hiding in a nearby ravine, and reported the abduction to police, describing the man as having short, curly dark hair, a round face, estimated to be mid-30s to 40s, approximately 5'9" and neatly attired, wearing a suit, shirt and tie, glasses, and black driving gloves. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police conducted an extensive search of the area by helicopter and posse, but found nothing. During the night of the abduction, an anonymous caller contacted Dana's parents and told them, "Your daughter is dead." It would be discovered that a suspect matching the description given by Roy Top High was stopped on the day of the abduction by Nevada Sheriff's Deputy Tom Hanna. The policeman observed the suspect's sports car being driving erratically on a lonely stretch of desert road at around 11:40 p.m. Hanna pursued and stopped the car, speaking with the driver, who was wearing black driving gloves, and produced a temporary California driver's license. The officer noticed a young sandy-haired woman slumped in the front seat of the sports car, who remained motionless during the entire encounter. He also noticed a bumper sticker on the back rear fender of the car which read, "Save the puppy fish." Because Hanna was in the middle of the desert, out of radio range, and had not been given an APB on the sports car in connection with the abduction, he let the suspect go with just a warning. 2 weeks later, Dana Lull's fully clothed body was found in an abandoned cinnabar mine shaft over 125 miles away on Mountain Springs Road in San Bernardino, California. She had been shot once in the head with a .22 long jacket bullet. Witness Roy Top High described the man's vehicle as a white sports car, possibly a 1966 to 1968 Triumph convertible, with old California license plates, a black cloth top, wire-spoked wheels, a chrome luggage rack on the trunk, and a missing grille. During this time, Lawrence Kane drove a white 1966 MGB convertible sports car, with a black cloth top, wire-spoked wheels, and a chrome luggage rack on the trunk. A man who bought the car from Kane in December 1974 recalled the car had a bumper sticker of some kind, but could not remember what it was. Kane was apparently a lover of fish, and kept a number of aquariums in his apartment. Lull's boyfriend Roy Top High reported to police that he saw his girlfriend's killer in the spring and a month after her abduction, but the man left before police arrived. According to his former employer Alan Dorfman, Kane was known to frequent the Spring and Night Club in Las Vegas. Both Nye County Sheriff's Deputy Tom Hanna and Roy Top High would pick Lawrence from the same photo ID lineup as the man they encountered the day Dana Lull was kidnapped. Without any evidence, Kane was never arrested for her abduction and murder. Lawrence Kane is a favorite suspect amongst some law enforcement and armchair sleuths, but there is very little evidence connecting him to any of the known Zodiac crimes, and he has never been charged with involvement. Although a photograph of Kane does somewhat resemble the composite sketch of the Zodiac killer at Berryessa, but others suspect more closely resemble to more famous composite given by SFPD officers Fowkes and Zelms, who spoke with the suspect directly after the Paul Stein killing on October 11, 1969. A sample of Kane's handwriting was voluntarily submitted to the SFPD in the late 1990s, which does show some similarity to the Zodiac's handwriting style, but not enough to definitively link him as the author of the letters. Kane should, however, be considered a strong suspect in both the disappearance of Donna Lass and the abduction and murder of Dana Lull. Although the Zodiac postcard alludes to Donna Lass as a victim, there is nothing to indicate that communication was sent by the Zodiac, and if it was, he may have been claiming credit for a crime he did not commit. Kane's identification by Kathleen Johns as the man who abducted her would seem to indicate he was the Zodiac, as the killer alluded to this incident in one of his letters. But John's identification came roughly 22 years after the event, and cannot be considered reliable. Kane was living under the name Lawrence Kane in Zephyr Cove, Nevada as of early 1999, and also maintained a property in South Lake Tahoe, California, which he operated as a vacation rental during the summer. He passed away on May 20, 2010 at the age of 86. Case 2. During the early morning hours of January 15, 1974, a man entered 803 North Edgemore Street and brutally tortured and strangled 4 members of the Otero family. It was the beginning of a nightmare for the residents of Wichita, Kansas, as the killer began a reign of terror. Using the self-styled initials BTK, which stood for bind, torture, kill, the elusive BTK strangler sent numerous letters to the media claiming responsibility for a series of deaths and demanded attention and recognition for his crimes. However, by 1979 he had vanished. A secret task force known as the Ghostbusters was set up to apprehend him, but after several years of investigation it ended in failure, and to many it seemed BTK had managed to elude justice. Then in 2004, the killer resurfaced and began sending a new series of communications in which he claimed more previously unknown victims, leading detectives to suspect he was planning to kill again. As 15-year-old Charlie Otero arrived home from Robinson Junior High School at 3:30 p.m. on January 15, 1974, he found his parents and 2 younger siblings dead inside the family home. When police arrived at 803 North Edgemore Street, they discovered the family had been strangled. The killer had used various ligatures. There were no signs of forced entry, and the killer had spent some considerable time with the victims, which was evident in the way they were murdered. Upon entering the house, 38-year-old Joseph Otero was found lying face down on the floor in the master bedroom. Both his wrists and ankles had been tied with cord cut from a Venetian blind, and he had been strangled with a brown belt and clothesline rope. There was vomit on the floor near his body. His wife, 34-year-old Julie Otero, was lying on the bed bound with the same cord, and she had a pillow covering her head, and from the bruises on her face it appeared she had fought the intruder and was struck. She too had been strangled. Their son, 9-year-old Joseph Otero too, was found lying face up on his bedroom floor bound the same way as his parents. However, police found he had been hooded with 2 t-shirts and a plastic bag, which the killer had used to suffocate him. Searching the rest of the house, police could not locate 11-year-old Josephine Otero until they entered the basement. There they found the young girl bound and hanging by her neck from a sewer pipe. Her hands were bound behind her back, and the killer had used the same cord to tie her feet, lower knees, upper knees, and then wrapped it around her waist. She was partially nude, wearing only a bra, sweatshirt, and socks. A single fingerprint was found on one of the chairs that had been positioned in front of some of the bodies, which police believed the killer had used to watch the victims slowly die. The murder investigation began immediately, and it was established the killer had cut the phone lines to the house before entering and confronting the Oteros after the 3 older children had gone to school. It was later confirmed the 2 youngest stayed home because they were feeling unwell. Either the killer or a family member had placed the family dog outside, where it was later found by police, who also suspected the family had been subdued through the use of a gun, because all of the Oteros were proficient in martial arts and could adequately defend themselves. Joseph Otero SNR's watch was missing, presumably taken. The family car, a 1966 beige Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser station wagon, was later found abandoned. A neighbor reported to police they saw an unknown man driving the Otero's car, which was found in the parking lot of a Dillon's grocery store. Neighbors of the Oteros reported seeing a suspicious-looking man in the area before the murders, and gave police a description from which a composite sketch was made of the suspect. They described the man as 6 feet tall, with dark shaggy hair and wearing a dark coat, and gave the time at roughly 8:45 a.m. Another neighbor reported seeing an unknown man with a dark complexion and a rumpled hat leaving the residence driving the Otero car at 10:35 a.m. Crime lab technicians spent 12 hours in the house and found semen in the bedroom as well as the basement, but it was determined that Josephine was the primary target of the killer's attention. 5 days after the tests, it was determined the killer had type O blood. However, they later learned all semen reverts to type O within 24 hours. It was believed the killer had planned the murders because he had brought the Venetian blind cord with him to the scene, which he used to tie up the victims. During the next 2 weeks of the investigation, police contacted 1,500 residents and reached out 500 law enforcement agencies for additional information on similar crimes, whilst the Wichita Eagle newspaper set up a secret program for residents to send anonymous tips. Detectives Bernie Drowitzy and Gary Caldwell spent the night in the Otero home after the murders with a psychic, hoping the killer would return. It was found the Oteros had only moved to Wichita 4 months before they were murdered, and were originally from Puerto Rico. Police visited the Panama Canal Zone, where Joseph Otero had been stationed for 6 months to establish if there was anything in his past that might have resulted in the deaths. They concluded the killings might have been perpetrated over a money dispute in Central America. One persistent rumor concerning the crime scene was that eggs were found throughout the Otero house. However, no eggs can be seen on any of the crime scene photographs, and no eyewitnesses remember any eggs being present when the bodies were found. The rumor was apparently started by a disturbed man who worked delivering eggs, and who falsely confessed to the murders. It was suspected the killer had been an opportunistic window peeper, but this theory was soon discounted because the killer had brought the pre-cut blind cord to the house. The Otero investigation was eventually scaled back, and the public interest in the case dwindled. On April 4, 1974, 21-year-old Catherine Bright and her brother Kevin arrived at her home and discovered an intruder had broken in and was lying in wait. The man confronted them and brandished a gun, told them he needed money and a car to get to New York. Kevin was forced to tie his sister to a chair and was then taken to another room. When the man attempted to wrap a cord around Kevin's neck and began to pull, he fought back and a struggle ensued. The man then shot Kevin Bright twice in the head with a .22 caliber pistol, and although wounded, he managed to run outside where he flagged down a passing motorist who took him to Wesley Medical Center. The intruder then returned to Catherine and stabbed her 3 times in her abdomen and the left. When police arrived at the address on 3217 East 13th Street, they discovered Catherine unconscious, and after she was taken to hospital, she died from her wounds 5 hours later. Kevin was able to give police a description of his attacker, who he said was male, around 25 years old, and wearing an orange shirt, orange jacket, and a black stocking cap. Detectives believe the killer may have expected Catherine to arrive home alone that day, and had to change his plans when he realized Kevin was also present. It was learned that Catherine had worked at Coleman on the same assembly line as Julie Otero, but this link between the cases was not made public. With very few leads, the murder of Catherine Bright went cold. In October 1974, police made an arrest in the Otero murders when a patient in a psychiatric ward made a confession. This was later discounted by police, who also disputed the confessions of 2 other men, claiming they were responsible for the murders. That same month, on October 22nd, someone called the TIPS hotline and spoke to Don Granger of the Wichita Eagle. The caller directed him to a mechanical engineering textbook at the Wichita Public Library. Granger passed the tip on to police, who located the textbook and found a letter inside which claimed credit for the Otero family murders. The letter appeared genuine because it went into great detail about the position of each body and the circumstances of the Otero deaths. The communication was a lengthy, single-space typed letter with numerous misspellings, bad grammar, punctuation, and syntax. In it, the killer claimed credit for the Otero murders and detailed how each member of the Otero family had been killed, and the position he left each body in the house. He also spoke of a monster which controlled him and promised more victims. Investigators requested the letter be withheld from the public to prevent further false confessions. They obtained a list of people who had checked out the library textbook, but gained no leads. On October 24th, police began to place a classified ad in the Wichita Eagle to communicate with the killer. BTK. Help is available. Call 684-6321 before 10 p.m. It ran for 4 days without any results. On October 31st, Don Granger wrote a column in the Wichita Eagle and invited BTK to call the number provided. In December, a copy of the letter was given to a reporter for a weekly magazine called The Sun. On December 11th, The Sun published a front-page story that included excerpts from the letter. Police Chief Hannon confirmed at a news conference later that day that the letter was real. Meanwhile, the police had almost 30 psychologists analyze the letter to establish a profile of the killer. The doctors concluded Beat K. Strangler had a fetish for bondage and torture, and due to the amount of errors, believed it had been written by someone with a limited education. Over the next 3 years, nothing was heard from the Beat K. killer, and no more murders were attributed to him during that time. Shirley Vian lived at 1311 South Hydraulic Street with her 3 children. On the morning of March 17, 1977, she was unwell, and her 2 oldest children stayed at home from school. Sometime during that morning, a stranger stopped Vian's son on the street and showed the boy photographs of a woman and child, seeking directions to their home. Later, at 11:45 a.m., a man knocked Vian's door, and when the 26-year-old answered, she saw a man holding a gun who he forced his way inside. He had with him some type of bag, either a suitcase or bowling bag, and told them he wasn't going to hurt anyone. When the man began to tie up Vian's 8-year-old son, he began to cry. That is when he placed the children inside the bathroom/closet and wedged one door closed and tied the other shut with Venetian blind cord he had brought with him. He then turned his attention to Shirley. She was undressed and bound hand and foot before he placed a plastic bag over her head and cord around her neck, which was used to strangle her. Eventually the children freed themselves and found their mother dead. When the police arrived, they found Vian's partially nude body on her bed. The Vian children told police they could hear their mother pleading with the man not to hurt them, and he kept telling her he would not. They were able to describe the stranger as a dark-haired man in his late 30s/40s with a paunch. 2 money orders were missing from the house, which police believed were taken by the killer. At this point, detectives didn't know if the Otero, Bright, and Vian murders were related, and had not yet surmised that a serial killer was stalking the streets of Wichita. On December 8, 1977, a man used a payphone at Central and St. Francis and called a Wichita police dispatcher. He told the female dispatcher, "Yes, you will find a homicide at 843 South Pershing. Nancy Fox." When the female dispatcher attempted to double-check the address, the man replied, "Yes, that's correct." He then hung up, leaving the phone off the hook, and walked away. When police arrived, they questioned witnesses who recalled seeing a blond man, approximately 6 feet tall, dressed in a gray industrial uniform, using the phone booth moments earlier. Police then proceeded to 843 Pershing, and upon entry noticed a window had been broken. When officers entered the duplex apartment house, they found 25-year-old Nancy Jo Fox dead in her bedroom. She was fully clothed, and the killer had bound her hands and feet with nylon stockings and wrapped another stocking tightly around her neck and used it to strangle her. Investigators found the phone line had been cut, and the killer had gained entry via a smashed window at the back of the duplex. The contents of Fox's purse had been emptied onto a coffee table, and a sweater was neatly draped over a chair. Her driving license was missing, and the police believed the killer had taken it as a memento of the crime. She had left her job at Hellsberg's Jewelers at around 9 p.m. the previous evening, and it was believed the killer had ambushed Fox as she returned home. Although police did find semen at the scene, an autopsy revealed she had not been sexually assaulted. The quality of the phone call was considered too poor for police to perform any type of voice analysis. They provided copies to broadcast stations. Nancy Fox, the 7th victim of the BTK Strangler. Nancy Fox, the 7th victim of the BTK Strangler. They later received around 110 calls on a special police contact number but none of the tips led to the identity of the killer. Detectives did not publicly connect the Otero and Fox murders, even though the similarities between the two cases involved semen left at the scene and severed phone lines. The murders began to worry the residents of Wichita, and numerous people began to take precautions to safeguard themselves. Once again, nothing more was heard from the killer until February 1978, when an envelope postmarked January 31st arrived at the Wichita Eagle Beacon. Inside was a single 3 by 5 inch index card, which contained a poem printed with a child's rubber stamping set. Surely locks, wilt thou be mine? Thou shalt not scream, nor yet fee the line, but lay on a cushion, and think of me, and death and how it's going to be. The person who opened it mistook it for a Valentine's Day advertising message and forwarded it to the classified ads department, where it was overlooked for several days. Because of the lack of publicity, BTK then sent another letter on February 10, 1978, to local television station Cake TV Channel 10. Attached to the letter was a detailed drawing of the Fox murder scene, which, when matched to the crime scene photographs, was almost identical. In the letter, the killer made reference to 7 victims and claimed responsibility for the Otero family, Vian and Fox murders, and left a 5th unnamed incident for police to work out. By now, most detectives believed it was the Catherine Bright murder. In the letter, the killer compared himself and his work to other serial killers and blamed his crimes on a demon and mysterious Factor X. After this, police went public with the cake letter once they realized their previous strategy of holding back information had not stopped the murders. Police Chief Richard Lemunyan told the press, "I want to restate that there is no question in my mind but that the person who wrote the letter killed these people." He also stressed calm amongst the public. "I know it is difficult to ask people to remain calm, but we are asking exactly that." Chief Lemunyan explained it was a difficult decision to go public with the second letter, and he had sought advice from psychologists and profilers. He decided it would be important to establish a communication link with the BTK strangler through the media. He added, "The utmost thing on my mind was public safety. How do we prevent this from happening again?" On November 6, 1978, Ed and Ruth Finley reported to Wichita police that Ruth was the victim of harassment by an unknown individual. Someone had been making obscene phone calls and sending her threatening letters, some with insidious poetry. "Here's to you, my tender Valentine, red with blood and tied with twine. Nothing too much for a Valentine. Gone from here by a whim of mine." The police registered the complaint, but later on November 21, 1978, 48-year-old Ruth was reported missing. When she finally showed up, she detailed a harrowing encounter with 2 men who abducted her and drove her around for 4 hours before she was able to escape. There was strong suspicion at the time that the BTK strangler was the individual known as the Poet, and behind the harassment, which continued until September 1981, when Police Chief Richard Lemunyan personally investigated the evidence and came to the conclusion that BTK was not responsible, but he knew who was. On April 28, 1979, BTK waited inside the home of 63-year-old Anna Williams, who lived in the 600 block of South Pinecrest. When she failed to show, he left, taking with him several items, including her scarf and jewelry. When she returned home at 11 p.m., she believed she had been the victim of a burglary. When officers were dispatched, they found an intruder had entered through a basement window and noticed the phone line had been cut. Later that year, on June 15, 1979, BTK sent Anna Williams a letter which arrived at her home in an 8.5 by 11-inch manila envelope. It contained a 19-line poem, a sketch, clothing and jewelry which had been taken during the break-in. In the poem, BTK regretted the woman had taken so long to return home because he intended to kill her. An identical copy of the envelope and poem was sent to Cake TV the following day, which was turned over to police. A female postal clerk opened the door at 4 a.m. and found a man standing there. He handed her an envelope and said, "Put this in the cake box." She described the man to police as a white male roughly 30 years old, 5 feet 9 inches tall, and wearing a blue jean jacket, jeans and gloves. She also remembered he was clean-shaven, had his hair cropped short above his ears, and had a gap in his front teeth. The poem was a direct reference to Anna Williams and pondered the question, "Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear? Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear? 'Twas the perfect plan of deviant pleasure, so bold on that spring night. My inner felling hot with propension of the new awakening season. Worn, wet with inner fear and rapture, my pleasure of entanglement, like New vines at night. Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear? Drop of fear-fresh spring rain would roll down from your nakedness. Descent to lofty fever that burns within. In that small world of longing, dear, rapture, and desperation. The game we play, fall of devil ears. Fantasy spring forth mounts to storm fury, then winter calm at the end. Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear? Alone, now in another time span I lay with sweet enraptured garments. Across most private thought, bed of spring moist grass, clean before the sun, enslaved with control, warm wind scenting the air, sunlight sparkled tears. In eyes so deep and clear. Alone again I trod in past memory of mirrors, and ponder why for. Number 8 was not. Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear? Wichita police now assigned 15 detectives and 8 lab investigators to the Beat K Strangler case full-time. This new squad looked for similar break-ins and began to canvass neighborhoods and interacted with residents. A new telephone hotline was set up and was inundated with tips, but no solid leads, whilst postal inspectors were consulted to learn everything they could about the latest letters. Detectives now turned back to the recording BTK had made on December 8, 1977, and sent a copy to a New York professor who specialized in enhancing recordings and had developed a computerized method to achieve this. He had used a similar method to enhance the Watergate tapes from the 1970s, as well as police dispatch recordings from the Kennedy assassination in 1963. The BTK recording was also aired on Wichita radio and television stations on August 15, 1979, which produced another influx of tips, but once again no solid leads. Once more the BTK Strangler went silent and would not make contact with authorities for another 25 years. At this time rumors about the killings became rife with speculation. People were afraid to go to laundromats because several of the victims had used the same laundromat, and it was believed he had followed them home from there. Others believed that a detective working the case was actually BTK, and this was the reason he was able to elude capture. There was a belief that BTK was an admin of justice student because the killings took place geographically close to WSU, and some of the language used in the BTK letters was police terminology. A psychology professor even claimed that a friend had done some therapy for BTK, and this person was scared to death of his patient. In July 1984, Wichita police established a new task force which was nicknamed the Ghostbusters. This team consisted of 8 hand-picked detectives under the command of Gary Fulton, and they were provided with a new computer and began the investigation by hiring a computer consultant to work with them in an attempt to try and discover the identity of the BTK Strangler. They assembled a mass collection of DNA evidence and entered all the relevant data into an IBM computer, which then produced a list of suspects. Detectives learned some crucial evidence during the Ghostbusters investigation, such as the revelation that all of the murders occurred within a 3.5-mile radius of one another. This meant the killer was only targeting victims in an area he felt comfortable and familiar with. The FBI profilers agreed with this assessment, and the Behavioral Science Unit developed their own psychological profile of the killer. Police now examined the Vian poem and found it had been patterned after a Curly Locks nursery rhyme which had appeared in a puzzle magazine called Games. They obtained a list of subscribers to the magazine, but found no leads. They also sent the Fox letter to Xerox headquarters in Syracuse, New York. The technicians there determined the letter was a 5th-generation copy of the original, which would make it difficult to trace to a specific typewriter. They believed it had been photocopied at the State Wichita University Library, and compiled a list of people who lived in the area during 1974 and 1979. Again, there were no leads. The Fox poem was found to have been patterned after another poem entitled "O Death," which had previously been published in a Wichita State University textbook. Investigators discovered the book had been used in an American folklore class taught by Professor P.J. Wyatt, and they obtained a copy of the class roster. The task force made lists of every male who lived within a quarter of a mile of the Otero, Bright, Vian, and Fox homes, as well as a list of white male students who attended Wichita State University between 1974 and 1979. Detectives focused their attention to the address lists because they believed this would lead to a crack in the case, and believed the geographical focus would provide the main clue to BTK's identity. All of these lists were then entered into the computer to give a better and more precise list of suspects. The computer produced a definitive list of 225 possible suspects. However, most of the names were of men who no longer lived in Wichita. The Ghostbusters team then proceeded to interview and eliminate every suspect on the list. Lab technicians were able to determine the semen left behind by the killer at several crime scenes was a type found in fewer than 6% of all males. On May 5, 1985, the body of 53-year-old Maureen Hedge was found at East 53rd Street North between Webb Road and North Greenwich Road. She had been abducted from her home at 6254 Independence Street, Park City on April 27, 1985, where police found the phone lines had been cut and apart from her missing car, nothing else was stolen. Her body was found dumped along a dirt road, and although she wasn't tied, a knotted pair of pantyhose was found nearby. An autopsy revealed she had been strangled. Her 1967 Monte Carlo was later found abandoned, and detectives did not connect this case with the BTK strangler because his MO involved home invasion murders in which he left the victims within their own homes, whilst Mrs. Hedge was found outside. A WSU student, 31-year-old Linda Shawn Casey, was found dead on the bedroom floor of her home at 356 North Spruce on June 29, 1985. She had been bound, beaten, sexually assaulted, and stabbed repeatedly. Again, this was not considered a BTK murder because the victim had been sexually assaulted, something which did not occur with previous victims. After 2 years, the Ghostbusters investigation ended in 1986 without an arrest. However, the task force had gained a useful insight into the case and obtained hundreds of blood and saliva samples voluntarily, which eliminated suspects from their lists. Just 5 men refused to give samples, and another 7 could not be discounted through DNA testing, which left a list containing the names of 12 prime suspects. One suspect was a former employee at the Coleman Company and a part-time postal worker who had been treated for psychiatric illness, but had lived in the same neighborhood as Nancy Fox at the time of her murder. A strong suspect was a former Wichita police officer who had left the department and was under surveillance, whilst another was a career military soldier who was previously stationed in Wichita and was then working as a security guard. He was reportedly a practitioner of bondage, something that featured heavily in the BTK Strangler's crimes. One of the Ghostbusters detectives, Lieutenant Al Stewart, said, "We tried 100,000 theories. We checked house numbers, the victim's length of residency, the phases of the moon. We read books, looking for arcane connections to mythology, witchcraft, and demonology. Still more killings were occurring in Wichita that bore a striking resemblance to BTK's particular style." On September 16, 1986, Bill Wegrel arrived home for lunch shortly before noon and found his wife Vicky on the bedroom floor. She had been strangled. When police arrived at 2404 West 13th Street, they found her body bound at the wrists and ankles, but could not locate what had been used to strangle her. She was rushed to Riverside Hospital, where she was pronounced dead. An autopsy revealed the victim had not been raped, and she had tissue under her fingernails, meaning she had fought with her attacker. This tissue was preserved for future reference. The body had been moved before police arrived, so there were never any crime scene photos of the Wegrel house crime scene. Vicky was a stay-at-home mom and had taken her 10-year-old daughter to OK Elementary School before 9 a.m. that morning, and then returned home with her 2-year-old son Brandon. A neighbor reported hearing an unusual amount of barking from 2 dogs, which were kept in a fenced backyard around 10:15 a.m. Another neighbor saw the family car pull out of the driveway at 10:30 a.m., but could not see who was driving. At 12:10 p.m. the police found the car, a 1978 gold Monte Carlo, parked 2 blocks away on the 1300 block of North Edwards. Relatives could find nothing missing from the home, except for Vicky's driving license. Investigators believed it could be a BTK Strangler-related murder, but strong suspicion was focused on Bill Wegrel, who was not arrested but strongly suspected of his wife's murder. He was working as a self-employed apartment maintenance man, and Vicky would volunteer as a babysitter at both St. Andrew's Lutheran Church, which the family regularly attended, and the Asbury United Methodist Church. Police were unsure of the motive for her murder, but a cloud of suspicion hung over Bill Wegrel for the next 18 years. A neighbor reported hearing an unusual amount of barking from 2 dogs, which were kept in a fenced backyard around 10:15 a.m. Another neighbor saw the family car pull out of the driveway at 10:30 a.m., but could not see who was driving. At 12:10 p.m. the police found the car, a 1978 gold Monte Carlo, parked 2 blocks away on the 1300 block of North Edwards. Relatives could find nothing missing from the home, except for Vicky's driving license. Investigators believed it could be a BTK strangler-related murder, but strong suspicion was focused on Bill Wegrel, who was not arrested but strongly suspected of his wife's murder. He was working as a self-employed apartment maintenance man, and Vicky would volunteer as a babysitter at both St. Andrew's Lutheran Church, which the family regularly attended, and the Asbury United Methodist Church. Police were unsure of the motive for her murder, but a cloud of suspicion hung over Bill Wegrel for the next 18 years. Hattie Smith was found dead by her husband on June 6, 1987, when he returned to the couple's home on 3193 South Clifton. 54-year-old Smith had been stripped naked, bound hand and foot with materials from the house, and then beaten, strangled and drowned in the bathtub. Police could find no signs of forced entry. On October 31, 1987, a body was found dumped in a pond on an industrial estate. It was the partially disrobed body of 15-year-old Shannon Olson. Police found she had been bound hand and foot and stabbed numerous times. This murder began a series of letters and phone calls to the police and media, with people claiming it was the work of the BTK strangler. Later that year, on December 31st, Mary Fager returned home to find her husband Philip dead. She immediately contacted police, who found Mr. Fager had been shot twice in the back. Searching the rest of the house, they discovered the bodies of her 2 daughters. 16-year-old Kelly Fager was found nude and asphyxiated from strangulation. 10-year-old Sherry was found submerged in the family hot tub. Her hands and feet were bound with black electrical tape, and she had also been strangled. The police suspected Bill Butterworth, a worker contracted to install a solarium in the family home. Butterworth had fled, taking the family car, and was later apprehended, but claimed he had no recollection of events after finding the Fagers dead. In January 1988, the BTK strangler sent a communication to Mary Fager in the form of a letter, in which he did not claim responsibility for murdering her family. However, he did show his appreciation for the real killer. BTK: I did not kill them, but I admire who did. Along with the letter, BTK also sent a drawing of his imaginary fantasy of Sherry Fager, bound and cowering in fear. Although it was never confirmed the letter was a genuine BTK communication, it would be revealed decades later that the killer used a secret symbol he had created to authenticate his letters from those making false claims to his crimes. In 1989, Police Chief Richard Lemunyon retired, and Captain Rick Stone was appointed to replace him. On June 7, 1990, a parking garage adjacent to City Hall collapsed due to poor construction and maintenance after a storm, which resulted in the loss of numerous police records on the BTK strangler case. On February 1, 1991, the body of Dolores Davis was found under a bridge in northern Sedgwick County by a 15-year-old boy. She had been missing since January 19, when she had been abducted from her home located at North Hillside, about half a mile east of Park City. Her hands, feet, and knees were bound with pantyhose, and during the autopsy it was determined she had been strangled. Beside the body, police found a female-style porcelain decorative mask. Investigators found her telephone line had been cut, and someone then threw a brick through a glass door at the rear of her home to gain entry. Davis's son Jeff spoke to reporters for the Wichita Eagle on December 7, 1991, and stated his belief his mother had been murdered by a serial killer, and noted the similarities between her murder and that of Maureen Hedge in 1985. Both the victims lived alone, less than 2 miles from each other, and pantyhose had used to bind and strangle both women. But detectives could not conclusively prove either murder was the work of BTK, who had not claimed these murders like he did with his previous victims. That same year, the Wichita Police Department assembled a cold case squad after police received a new lead in the BTK murders. This tip eventually led nowhere, and Captain Paul Dotson refused to disclose the nature of the tip. Nothing had been heard from BTK since his purported 1988 letter to Mary Fager, which expressed his admiration for the killer of her family. Many believed the BTK strangler was either dead, imprisoned for an unrelated crime, or was unable to continue killing due to ill health. On May 11, 1997, FBI profiler Robert Ressler addressed those present at the Wilner Auditorium at the Wichita State University concerning his belief that BTK had either left the area, was dead, or was confined to a mental institution. Ressler had developed a profile of the killer, believing he was probably a graduate student or a professor of criminal justice at WSU, and was most likely in his mid to late 30s at the time of the murders. The investigation of similar crimes continued, and some bore striking similarities to BTK's crimes. At 1423 South Market Street, 53-year-old Deanna Law was found strangled on May 11, 1997. She had been sexually assaulted, and her nude body was found in the bathtub. In this case, a neighbor was arrested and charged after admitting to the crime. However, he was later released after his lawyer contended this client had faked his confession. In February 1998, former police chief Lemunyan said in an interview that the typewritten, rambling communique, which purports to be from BTK, which was given to police a year after the Fager murders, had no connection to murder of Philip Fager and his daughters. He did not confirm if the letter had been sent by the serial killer, known as the BTK Strangler, but did comment that police do receive bogus letters from people claiming to be the Strangler. In 2000, Dr. Deborah Sherman Coughlin, president of the Violent Crimes Institute, created her own profile of the killer, in which she stated he was most likely a single white male, aged between 28 to 30 at the time of the murder, and resided near the Oteros or spent time in the area to form his fantasy about Josephine. Based on evidence, she added he was over 6'1", neat in appearance and wore darker clothes by choice and owned a dark-colored car. He would be considered quiet by those who knew him, but suffered from an extreme pathology and would be considered a psychopath. She contended there were no voices or Factor X and knew exactly what he was doing. Neighbors in the 2000 block of South Pershing Avenue became suspicious on June 4, 2002, when they noticed a boarded-up basement window had been opened on the Slaughter residence. Police were called and found 86-year-old Dorothy Slaughter had been savagely beaten along with her husband. She died 2 weeks later, however her husband survived the attack. It was discovered the phone line had been cut, and the couple's car keys were missing. The BTK Strangler's identity had been a matter of conjecture ever since his first mass murder of the Otero family, and internet crime boards and armchair sleuths discussed a variety of theories concerning his almost phantom-like ability to remain undetected after nearly 30 years and 7 confirmed victims. Some believed he injected himself too closely into the investigation and got scared of capture and stopped. Others believed the memories, photographs, and trophies were enough to contain his obsession, and that he was intelligent enough to stop. The FBI referred to the BTK case as one of its top unsolved mysteries. On March 17, 2004, the Wichita Eagle received a package with the return address as Bill Thomas Killman, 1684 S. Old Manor, Wichita, Kansas, 67202, and which contained a letter. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a photocopy of the driving license of Vicki Wegrel, along with 2 photographs of the crime scene. Because Wegrel's body had been removed before any crime scene photographs could be taken, Wichita detectives knew it could only have come from Wegrel's killer. Lieutenant Kenneth Landwehr said he was 100% sure it was from the BTK Strangler, because the envelope also contained BTK's signature code, which confirmed its authenticity. It also contained a 23 alphanumeric cipher, GBS0AP7, TNLTRDATBSFAV14. The murder of Vicki Wegrel was never definitively linked to BTK, and Bill Wegrel was always suspected in his wife's death. This letter now attributed the 1986 murder to the BTK Strangler and exonerated Bill Wegrel of the crime. The DNA sample taken from Vicki Wegrel's fingernails was tested against the saliva on the envelope of the BTK letter. It was confirmed as a match. There was no doubt the BTK Strangler was responsible for Vicki Wegrel's murder, and the Wichita police now began swabbing old suspects against this DNA evidence, and also started to receive an unprecedented number of tips from the public. The TV station Cake received a new communication on May 5, 2004. The letter was handed over to police, who found it contained several pages entitled The BTK Story, along with a word puzzle and a photocopy of 2 fake IDs. The first was of a Southwestern Bell employee, and the other was for a Wichita Public Schools special officer. Former Detective Bernie Drowitzky commented that it appeared the letter was genuine. The return address was for 408 Clayton, a fictitious address, and contained the name Thomas B. King. Both ID cards were from real employees, and they were traced and later ruled out of the investigation. The multi-page letter containing the BTK story was typed in block capitals and structured as chapters from a book, and it appeared the killer was planning on documenting his own crimes. One of the pages from this intended story was an excerpt from Chapter 7 P.J's, and another contained breaking and entering hints. The word puzzle contained numerous words associated with the BTK case and his crimes, such as address Anderson, builds, crews, details, fake ID, fantasies, follow, for sale, go for it, handyman, help, insurance, kid, Larry, MO, model, my DNA, officer, pig, pin, plan, poet, prowl, real, realtors, rum, ruse, school, serviceman, sex, slit, spot, steam, strong, telephone, time, victim, Wichita, WPD, and wrong. Concerning the fake IDs, it was believed the killer was attempting to explain to detectives how he gained entry to some of his victims' home. Former police chief Richard Lemunyan commented that in the Vian and Wegrel cases, police were unsure how the BTK strangler had gained entry to the residences, and surmised he must have been welcomed in by his victims who believed he was a city employee or worked in a position of trust. On June 9, 2004, a third communication was sent to the Wichita Police Department. Inside was a letter which described the Otero murders in graphic detail, along with a drawing of a nude woman in bondage, gagged with a noose around her neck beside the words, "The sexual thrill is my bill." This drawing also contained the BTK secret code to verify the authenticity. It also contained another page from the BTK story entitled Chapter 1, A Serial Killer is Born. This was significant because the DNA from the Otero murders had degraded to a standard that it could no longer be used to link the BTK strangler to the Otero murders. With this letter, the killer had implicated himself in the murders and, if caught, could be charged. On July 17, 2004, a package was left at the downtown public library and was dropped into the return slot. It contained more material from BTK, including a confession in which he claimed responsibility for the death of 19-year-old Jake Allen from Argonia, Kansas earlier that month. This was later revealed to be a false claim, and Allen's death was ruled a suicide. During this time, an unidentified individual began a series of posts on the Crime and Justice message board, in which they implicated their brother-in-law in the BTK murders, and who they referred to by his initials TK. The posts went into detail about the alleged crimes of TK, and described him as a pedophilic Satanist who committed the Otero murders with his abusive uncle, and later on his own. There was never any indication that TK was the BTK strangler, and when an arrest was made in the case, nothing more was heard about this potential suspect. On August 20th, the Wichita police released the Death poem from the Nancy Fox murder, and publicly acknowledged the P.J. Wyatt involvement in the case. This was only known to Detective John Garrison in 1978, and was investigated and discounted as a dead end. Professor Wyatt taught the poem as part of her American folklore class, which was attended by many police officers. Similarly, on August 26th, they released the Anna, Why Didn't You Appear poem, which had previously been examined by Columbia University professors who declared it to be an original work. An 8.5 by 11-inch manila envelope was dropped into a UPS box on October 22, 2004. It was unsealed with no address, and contained a poem threatening the life of Lieutenant Ken Landworth, the lead investigator, as well as 10 5 to 3-inch cards which depicted images of bondage and terror of children pasted onto them. Most significantly, it contained a supposed biography detailing many aspects of the killer's life. These details were subsequently released to the public. He was born in 1939, which would make his current age 64 over 65. His father died in World War II, and his mother raised him. His mother was forced to work, so his grandparents raised him. His mother worked during the day near the railroad. He had a cousin named Susan, who moved to Missouri. His family moved a lot, but always lived near a railroad. His grandfather played the fiddle and died of a lung cancer. His mother started dating a railroad detective when BTK was around 11 years old. This relationship would have occurred during the years 1950 to 1955. In the early 1950s, he built and operated a ham radio. He participated in outdoor hobbies including hunting, fishing, and camping. As a youth, he attended church and Sunday school. He had a female, Hispanic acquaintance named Petra, who had a younger sister named Tina. Around 1960, he went to Tech Military School. He then joined the military for active duty and was discharged in 1966. He has a basic knowledge of photography and the ability to develop and print pictures. In 1966, he moved back in with his mother, who had remarried and was renting out part of her house. His first job was as an electromechanic, requiring some travel. After attending more tech school, he worked repairing copiers and business equipment. This sometimes required travel, and he was away from home for extended periods. He admits to soliciting prostitutes. He has a lifetime fascination with railroads and trains, has written or still writes poetry. An example of this is the Anna, Why Didn't You Appear poem and the Oh, Death to Nancy poem that were released in earlier media advisories. Utilized fake identification to gain access to people's homes or to conduct surveillance. The latest communication arrived on the 30th anniversary of BTK's first letter to police in which he claimed credit for the Otero murders. It was impossible to verify if any of the information in this letter was correct, false, and merely intended to mislead the investigation. Also included was a revised chapter list of the previously titled The BTK Story, which was sent on May 5, 2004 and now titled The BTK Files. 2 lines are drawn through chapters 1 and 8, which were already sent to police. One of the cards contained a photograph of a woman bound, on her knees on the floor, her hands tied behind her back and a rope tied around her mouth. She is looking into the camera with an expression of terror on her face. Wichita police hold a press conference on November 30, 2004, in which they acknowledged the biographical information BTK sent in his latest communication and requested the help of the public in locating an individual with the corresponding personal information. Police began surveillance of one suspect after his name is given by several different people who suspect him of being the BTK strangler. On December 1, 2004, after a surveillance operation, an arrest was made in the case. However, later that same day the suspect was released. Chief Norman Collins told reporters, "We have not, and I repeat, not made an arrest in connection with BTK." The arrested man was later cleared by DNA testing. On December 14, 2004, a man walking through Murdoch Park noticed a white bag which seemed to contain something. Retrieving it, he noticed it held several items, including the Kansas photo driving license of Nancy Fox. He took it home and called Cake TV, who determined it was from BTK. Police examined the package, which contained Nancy Fox's driving license, a child's PJ doll which was bound at the hands and feet with a plastic bag over the head, some pantyhose, and Chapter 2, Dawn of the BTK Files and BTK's secret code on a piece of paper. The BTK task force now began working with the FBI, and Chief Williams announced that more officers and resources would be devoted to the case. On January 25, 2005, Cake TV Channel 10 received a package from BTK, which was identified as communication number 08, and had the return address of S. Killet, 803 N Edgemore. This was the address of the Otero residence, and it contained a postcard which directed police to North Seneca Street between 69th and 77th Streets near Valley Center. This was a small town where Catherine and Kevin Bright were from. Cake reporters found a Toasties cereal box leaning against a sign post which was weighted down with a brick. On the cereal box was stenciled a large B above the T of Toasties, which was circled, and below was stenciled a large K. The police were notified and found it contained jewelry, Chapter 9, hits from the BTK files, and a note inquiring if they had found communication number 07, which had been left at a home improvement store on January 8. Police had previously found this communication, and it supposedly contained items similar to the Toasties box, such as more jewelry placed inside a Rice Krispies cereal box. It had been placed in the bed of a pickup truck at a Home Depot, but was discarded by the truck owner. Detectives then checked the CCTV surveillance tape of the parking lots, and found it contained footage of an individual driving a black Jeep Cherokee, leaving the box in the pickup. The footage was too distorted to make out the license plate or the features of the individual. This package contained another bound doll, which police believe was meant to symbolize Josephine Otero. Also inside this package was a piece of paper with a typed message. It read, "Communication. Can I communicate with floppy and not be traced to a computer? Be honest. Under. Miscellaneous section for 94. Rex, it will be okay. Run it for a few days in case I'm out of town, etc. I will try a floppy for a test run sometime in the near future, February or March." More postcards were sent to Cake on February 3, 2005. This postcard, entitled Hap Cakeman, was notified by Cake live on air after it directly mentioned evening anchors Susan Peters and Jeff Herndon. The BTK Strangler was now gaining the attention he had always craved. However, police decided to set a trap. On February 16th, they ran the requested ad in the Wichita Eagle, which stated, "Rex, it will be okay. Contact me, P.O. Box first 4 Ref. Numbers at 67202. 2 weeks later, on February 26th, BTK sent communication number 11 to the Fox News station affiliate KSAS-TV. Inside was a letter, a photocopy of the cover of the 1989 novel Rules of Prey by John Sanford, a gold-colored necklace with a large medallion, and a purple 1.44 megabyte Memorex floppy disk. The disk contained one valid file which contained the message, "This is a test," and directed police to read the accompanying index cards with instructions for further communications. However, computer technicians found the file contained personal information in the properties section of the Word document and were able to ascertain it had last been saved by someone named Dennis. They were also able to learn that the disk had been used at both the Park City Library and the Christ Lutheran Church. Detectives now began to search for anyone matching that first name to people associated with the church. An internet search brought up the church website, which identified one Dennis Rader as president of the congregation. Rader was a 59-year-old supervisor of the Park City Compliance Office, married with 2 grown children, and was unknown to police with no criminal record. Investigators now placed Rader under surveillance and found he owned a black Jeep Cherokee identical to the one seen on the Home Depot surveillance tape on January 8, 2005. Because police had DNA from the killer, they approached Rader's daughter to obtain a DNA sample and waited for the results. It was a match. On February 25, 2005, Dennis Rader was arrested on his way home to Park City. One officer asked, "Mr. Rader, do you know why you're going downtown?" To which Rader replied, "Oh, I have suspicions why." At a press conference the next morning, Wichita Police Chief Norman Williams announced, "The bottom line, BTK is arrested." After his arrest, police raided Rader's home and found numerous items which implicated him in the BTK serial murders. In his possession, detectives found hundreds of Polaroid pictures, some of which were of the BTK crime scenes, whilst most depicted Rader in acts of self-bondage imitating his victims. In some of these Polaroids, Rader is seen wearing the same female-style porcelain decorative mask which was left with the body of Dolores Davis. There were numerous drawings of his bondage fantasies, several books and magazines on serial killers and serial murder, an assortment of bondage paraphernalia which included handcuffs, rope and tape, and most importantly the original BTK letters and trophies from his murders, including jewelry and clothing. Police also found information he had collection on his victims, which he kept in separate folders on his home computer labeled projects. The Otero murders were Project Little Mex, named after Josephine Otero, whom detectives always believed was the primary target. Catherine Bright was Project Lights Out, Shirley Vian, Project Blackout, Nancy Fox, Project Foxhunt, Maureen Hedge, Project Cookie, Vicky Wegrel, Project Piano and Dolores Davis, Project Dogside. There was also information on potential future victims who Rader had already begun stalking. These unknown targets were labeled Project Crest, Project West Lincoln, Project Green, Project Delano, Project Waco, and Project Steaks and Ale. The Christ Lutheran Church, his Park City Hall office, and the main branch of the Park City Library were also searched by police. Lieutenant Landwehr conducted Rader's interrogation, during which he asked, "I need to ask you, how come you lied to me? How come you lied to me?" Landwehr replied, "Because I was trying to catch you." Rader understood the fatal mistake he had made in sending the computer disk and said, "The floppy did me in." On February 28, Rader was charged with 10 counts of first-degree murder. The items taken from his residence and his confession implicated him in the murders associated with the BTK case. On March 1, his bail was set at $10 million, and on March 5, 2005, it was confirmed by various media sources that Rader had confessed to the 10 murders associated with the BTK Strangler investigation. He admitted to the murders of the 4 members of Otero family, Catherine Bright, Shirley Vian, Nancy Fox, Maureen Hedge, Vicky Wegrel, and Dolores Davis, and confessed to interviewers he had planned to begin killing again, and had even set a date of October 2004. He denied involvement in any others' murders, and police found no more evidence to charge him with any additional crimes. His wife and children denied any knowledge of his actions, and Mrs. Rader subsequently began divorce proceedings. Despite his confession, Rader entered a plea of not guilty on May 3, 2005, and the trial was scheduled for June 27. On that date, Rader changed his plea to guilty and described in detail the murders for which he was accused. Rader did not apologize to the victims' families or appear repentant, which experts believed was a clear indication of his psychopathic personality. Because Kansas had no death penalty at the time of the murders, Dennis Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences, with a minimum of 175 years. On August 19, 2005, he was moved to the El Dorado Correctional Facility, where he will be kept in solitary confinement indefinitely. Case 3. In December 1924, a young homeless man reported to the German police in Silesia that he had narrowly escaped from a madman who attempted to kill him with a pickaxe. When officers went to the address at number 10 Teichstrasse and arrested a 64-year-old butcher named Karl Denke, they believed they had the wrong man. Well known to local residents, who knew him as Papa Denke, when questioned the suspect claimed he merely attacked Vincent Olivier in self-defense. Denke was placed in a cell, where 2 days later he inexplicably hanged himself. Now with concerning questions about why the respectable prisoner would commit suicide, detectives decided to search Denke's apartment, where to their shock they discovered a large amount of human body parts and bones kept in storage. The murderer had also kept a detailed ledger containing the names of his victims, and it was strongly believed he had been eating the flesh of the people he murdered. Known as the Cannibal of Münsterberg or the Zaibik Cannibal, it was believed Denke had been responsible for the murders of upwards of 31 people, and possibly even more abhorrent, that he had been selling the human meat at his butcher's shop for decades to the unsuspecting people of Münsterberg. Karl Denke was born on August 12, 1860 in Kunzendorf, Silesia in the Kingdom of Prussia. He was a difficult child to raise according to his parents, who had several children and ran a nursery, and would later say that as a small child Karl refused to speak to anyone until the age of 7. He was known as a soft and quietly spoken child, but around the age of 12 he began to run away from the Denke farmhouse, and was always brought back by police. Upon graduating from elementary school, he became an apprentice gardener and made a comfortable life for himself by the age of 25. When his father died, his older brother inherited their childhood home, and Denke received a portion of the money, which he used to purchase a piece of land. His attempt at farming failed. He sold the land. He then bought a house on what is now called Stołowa Street in Katowice, but inflation forced him to sell it. But Denke refused to move out, and instead lived in a small apartment to the right of the house's ground floor. He also ran a nearby shop from where he sold meat at the Wrocław weekly market, the source of which would later be investigated by police. At the time, Denke always declared the meat to be goat flesh. In 1880, he moved to the city of Münsterberg and began renting an apartment at number 10 Teichstrasse, which was owned jointly by the Voigt and Gabriel families. It was said that although he was well liked in the community, he had little interaction with his co-tenants. He worked occasionally as an organ player at the local church, and was known affectionately by those within the community as Vater Denke/Papa Denke. On February 21, 1903, a young German woman, Ida Lahner, went missing. It would be Denke's first recorded murder, and he was never suspected of the crime, and went on to claim many more victims throughout the following years, mostly homeless vagrants or poor travelers. By 1906, Denke had quit his membership with the church. He would go on to murder 25-year-old Emma Sander on December 21, 1909, a crime for which another man was sentenced. Butcher Eduard Trotman was arrested in 1910 on suspicion of Sander's murder, because he had previously solicited the young woman, and had been seen in her company prior to her death. In 1911, he was found guilty and sentenced to 15 years in Glatz prison. Denke's murderous spree continued up until December 20, 1924, when he approached a young homeless man named Vincent Olivier. He requested 35-year-old Olivier's help in drafting a letter, for which he would pay him. When Olivier began to write the letter under Denke's dictation, it began with the words, "Adolphe, you fatty," which caused Olivier to begin laughing. As he turned his head to the side, Denke suddenly hit him in the head with a pickaxe, wounding his scalp but not killing him. At that moment, a coachman by the name of Gabriel heard cries for help which seemed to be coming from Denke's lodgings. As Gabriel rushed down to help, he found Olivier staggering along the corridor with blood streaming from his open wound. Before falling unconscious on the ground, the young man blurted out Vater Denke had attacked him with an axe. Gabriel soon alerted the authorities, and Denke was arrested and questioned about the incident. He admitted attacking Olivier, but claimed he was merely defending his property from what he believed was an unknown burglar. Officers placed him in a holding cell, where, according to police, just 2 days later he hanged himself with some type of ligature he fashioned. Detectives now wondered why such a respected member of the community would kill himself over what seemed to be a misunderstanding. When officers were dispatched to Denke's house, they found a gruesome collection of human body parts, which had been stored in his home. There appeared to be numerous victims along with evidence of cannibalism, such as jars of pickled meat as well as many blood-stained clothing hung up in his closet, and it looked like Denke had been murdering transients and homeless people for many years. The pickled meat was sent to chemists at Wrocław who declared it human flesh. A ledger was found at his home, which contained the names and details of his many crimes, with at least 31 victims recorded by Denke. The names of his many victims included Heinrich Bruchmann, a carpenter from Kammerswaldau killed on February 2, 1914, a railroader from Reumen named Nebel, murdered on January 8, 1919, and Caspar Hubelek, who was dispatched on April 20, 1924. Many more were listed, such as Laborer Franz Nies, tailors Johann Klose, Ewald Koenig and Johann Groger, a butcher by the name of Robert Lorenz, farmers Karl Seidel and Emil Exner, weaver Joseph Nierlich, confectioner Adolf Salisch, gardener Hermann Kuschink, and workers Paul Lux, Oskar Heinzel, and Wilhelm Rathmann. Amongst the names were two bakers Julius Busch and Friedrich Lazina, as well as painter Karl Becker, a locksmith by the name of Hermann Muller, and Max Heidenreich, who had been a blacksmith. His youngest victim was just 16-year-old, and oldest at 76. The 31st and last known victim was named Rokas Pollock, a Breslau fur dealer who was murdered on November 17, 1924. Despite Denke's detailed records, police came to believe there were even more victims unaccounted for, especially considering the large number of body parts found at his home, with estimates as high as 42 or even more. A detailed police report of the remains found at Denke's house included 2 shoulder blades, a pair of collarbones, 16 femurs, of which 1 pair of remarkably strong ones, 2 pairs of very thin ones, 6 pairs and 2 left femurs, 15 medium-sized pieces of long bones, 4 pairs of elbow bones, 7 heads of radii, 9 lower parts of radii, 8 lower parts of the elbow, a pair of upper shin bone, a pair of lower elbows and radii, of which extremities still remain well connected, a pair of upper arms and a pair of upper arm heads, 8 heels and ankle bones, 120 toes and phalanx, 65 feet and metacarpal bones and 5 first ribs, and 150 pieces of ribs. Police also found the pickaxe Denke had used to attack Olivier, as well as several knives that might have been murder weapons, and a saw the killer used to dismember the bodies of his victims. The subsequent police investigation found that Denke had obtained permission from city officials to sell shoelaces door to door, which had been made from the processed human hair of his victims. Detectives also discovered 2 previous victims had escaped, but never reported it to the authorities. Eduard Trottmann, the butcher imprisonment for the murder of Emma Sander, had previously been released in 1922 for good behavior, and was now, with the contents of Denke's ledger revealing his victims, exonerated over the death of the young woman, and he later sued for damages in 1925. Some residents now remembered Denke operated a shop from where he sold meat, and soon people suspected it possible the killer may have sold human flesh to the unsuspecting patrons of the Wrocław weekly market. The case of Karl Denke had been largely forgotten to history until the wooden shed in Denke's garden was destroyed after World War II, and several skulls and human bones were unearthed by the new Polish owners of the house. Although much of his life and the motive for his crimes remain a mystery, the residents of Zebus, as the village is known today, remember the case of Karl Denke, the cannibal from Münsterberg. Case 4. Few knew his name, but many would remember Lloyd Avery too for his memorable role in John Singleton's 1991 Oscar-nominated film Boys and the Hood, as the gang member who leaned out of the window of the bright red 1988 Hyundai Excel, wielding a sawn-off shotgun to blast Morris Chestnut's character, the promising high school football star Ricky Baker, as he ran for his life in the gang-infested neighborhood of Crenshaw in Los Angeles. From a young age, Lloyd Avery too had wanted to be a musician, but a career in films soon became his burning passion. But after starring in Singleton's movie, Avery's career took somewhat of a step backwards, and few knew his private life was becoming eerily similar to that of the on-screen character that kick-started his acting work. His transition from Hollywood actor to an inmate at Pelican Bay State Prison is a tragic journey of one man reaching the precipice of fame, only to bring about his own downfall. Lloyd Fernandez Avery was born on June 21, 1969, and grew up in a working-class neighborhood next to Baldwin Hills, known as the Black Beverly Hills in L.A. Along with his brother Cha, father Lloyd Sr. and mother Linda, the Averys were a quiet middle-class family. Their father was a man of many skills, a qualified plumber, electrician, and an expert carpenter who operated his own business, while his wife was a stay-at-home mom until the late 1980s, when she worked in banking. Avery had a comfortable childhood, and she would later say, "We were silver spoon kids. We never needed for nothing." Unlike some of their friends, the family of 6 had a pool in their backyard at View Park. Raised in a Christian household, their parents instilled in the boys and their sister the value of a good education, and they were enrolled into school integration programs, with Lloyd attending Beverly Hills High School. There, he excelled in baseball and water polo. Often seen driving his brown Pinto, doing donuts near the swim gym, Avery was considered the class clown, usually telling jokes to his classmates. Despite his shy nature sometimes, he was known as a fun person to be around, and although he didn't date much, the girls in his lectures were enamored with his pretty boy looks and long eyelashes. Some of his closest friends were the children of some of most well-known celebrities in the music business, such as musician and songwriters Quincy Jones, Smokey Robinson, and Clarence Avant. Avery and his fellow students would often attend house parties on the weekends, meeting up in mansions while the parents were on vacation. But Avery didn't drink or do drugs. Instead, he liked to play a game called Party and Pouch, in which people would, as actor and friend Dorian Reed refers to it, steal shit at parties just to steal shit. But at this point in his life, Avery was no budding criminal. He was more of an attention seeker, a troublemaker with a high-pitched laugh, who wasn't interested in gang culture until after 1991. Avery had a knack for exposing insecurities, pushing buttons, and developed something of a sarcastic streak, which sometimes provoked a reaction. Sometimes things got violent. Avery's friend Brent Rollins, the art director and graphic designer who created the logo for Boys in the Hood, recalls how one-time comedian Robin Harris attacked Avery at a Jet magazine photo shoot minutes after meeting him. "I don't know what Lloyd said to him," says Rollins. "All I remember is that Robin Harris was choking him against a sofa." But his incessant needling was just one negative part of his larger personality. He had a mischievous streak, and a really sweet streak, Rollins says. The day before Christmas Eve, he would drive around to people's houses to give them Christmas cards. Who does that? Avery was also impulsive and reckless, something which led to his first incarceration. During one night in 1988, Avery and several friends, including Dorian Reed, were leaving a UCLA party in Westwood when they were approached by a group of frat brothers. Avery cracked a joke, some words were exchanged between groups, and soon a fight broke out. Then just as a patrol car appeared down the street, 3 gunshots rang out. Although Avery wasn't the one who fired the weapon, he was carrying a fake ID, and as a result spent 3 days in jail. His friends grew concerned afterward, not because of the circumstances of what happened, but because of Avery's reaction to it. "What scared me was that Lloyd was laughing about it," says Avery's friend Keith Davis. "He told me that he really liked jail. It's like, how the hell do you get locked up and you just enjoy it?" He was so flippant. After dropping out of Los Angeles Trade Technical College, Avery worked alongside his father, but didn't want to follow in his footsteps despite being developing a gift as a handyman. Avery had a passion was music, but his father disapproved, so much so that he once took a baseball bat to his son's SP-1200. He wasn't all that happy with the choices Lloyd had made, his mother Linda Avery says. But what his father wanted for Lloyd wasn't for Lloyd. It seemed Lloyd Avery, too, had learned a valuable lesson from the incident, but not the one his father had intended. In June 1990, he was arrested for stealing studio equipment from a Guitar Center. It was around this time that Avery would get his big break, albeit unexpected. A friend, John Singleton, was making his first feature film. As Avery would later explain during his murder trial, "I met the right person at the right time, and they put me in a movie." An Inglewood native, Singleton had excelled at the filmic writing program at USC, and was a 2-time winner of the Jack Nicholson Screenwriting Award. He had aspirations to make movies, and with his undeniable raw talent, he had a drive to succeed. Shortly after graduation, Columbia Pictures agreed to film Singleton's script for Boys and the Hood with him as the director. The cast was made up of, like Avery, mostly locals, for which Singleton intended to keep a sense of realism to his project, which depicted gang culture and the lives of 3 young African Americans growing up in South Central Los Angeles. The film followed the friendship between Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character Trey Styles and the Baker brothers played by Ice Cube and Morris Chestnut. In one of the film's most memorable scenes, Chestnut's Ricky Baker, a promising football star, and Gooding's character go to the local store to pick up groceries. There they spot a group of blood-affiliated gang members led by Ferris, one of whom was played by Lloyd Avery too, and the two split up to escape any trouble. Avery was required to be on set to show support, even if he appeared on the day's call sheet or not. His co-stars remember him as friendly and humble, and he apparently took direction well from his friend Singleton, who meticulously prepared Avery for his big scene, which just so happened to be the most iconic scene of the movie. He instructed Avery at every turn how to point the gun, how to generate a simultaneously cold-hearted and menacing stare. No detail was considered too small. But that day's shooting did not get off to an encouraging start. The scene involved Cuba Gooding Jr., whose character was about to witness his best friend's murder. At this stage in his career, he was a method actor and spent all morning in his trailer brooding. Just before shooting started, Avery greeting him and Gooding snapped, "Don't fucking talk to me right now." A production assistant stepped in to defuse the situation. Despite this discord on set, the finished scene is one of the most emotional in the film, a resulting masterclass in building tension that culminates in Avery's scene-stealing appearance as Knucklehead number 2. "That shot of him out the window holding the gun is iconic," says Malcolm Norrington, a college friend of Singleton's who played Knucklehead number 1. "John was so happy when he got that shot." The gang members eventually catch up with Chestnut's character, who is tragically murdered. Avery's gun-toting gangbanger is seen leaning out of the window of Ferris' bright red sports car, shooting Ricky twice with a double-barreled shotgun, killing him instantly. Towards the end of the film, Ice Cube's Darren Doughboy, Baker seeks revenge for the death of his brother and enlists Trey to help him. In a moment of redemption, Trey Styles heeds the advice of his father and returns home. Baker goes through with his plan and catches up with Ferris and his gang outside a local fast food restaurant. And as they attempt to flee, they are cut down by shots from an AK-47. Lloyd Avery II's character is killed outright, whilst his fellow gang member Ferris is executed by Cube's Doughboy. In a poignant aftermath, Doughboy states his understanding of why his friend chose to leave before the murders, and explains how he too will soon face retaliation for his actions. The film represents themes of revenge and gang culture prevalent in Los Angeles, and would go on to become a critical and commercial success. The film was nominated for Best Director and Best Original Screenplay at the 64th Academy Awards, and was selected in 2002 for preservation into the National Film Registry. His character, despite having only appeared in several small scenes, made Avery a celebrity around the neighborhoods of Los Angeles because of his notorious role in the film as a member of the Crenshaw Mafia gangsters. The 6 feet 1 inch Avery was easily instantly recognizable and found himself ushered past the queues outside nightclubs. Initially, he enjoyed his newfound fame and intended on fully exploiting it. He hired an agent and went on numerous auditions, and his future in the movie industry seemed unstoppable. With his African-American and Mexican descent and handsome good looks, it was believed the young Avery would go far, possibly even landing leading roles one day. During this time, his music career began to take off as he produced Push, the lead single on actress Tisha Campbell's debut album, Tisha. His acting career continued. This time he was cast in Singleton's follow-up, Poetic Justice in 1993, alongside his Boys co-star Dedrick D. Gobert. This new role of Thug number 1 would hardly be considered a step up from his previous character of Knucklehead number 2, but Singleton had planned to nurture Avery, who was, after all, an untrained actor. He starred alongside his brother Cha, who played Thug number 2, as well as Janet Jackson, Regina King, and the late Tupac Shakur. His cameo, where he once again murdered an innocent character, is the strongest thread connecting Poetic Justice as the successor to Boys and the Hood. It is quite a different film from Singleton's debut, being both a road trip movie and love story, and is quieter and slower than Boys but also unfocused. The film proved a disappointment with critics and underperformed at the box office. Poetic Justice would be a disappointment to Avery too. In his own brash style, he let Singleton and everyone else at the film's premiere know exactly what he thought of it. As the closing credits rolled, Avery stood up and shouted, "That shit was whack, John." The incident didn't prove to be the end of Avery's friendship with Singleton, but it was just the latest instance of Lloyd being Lloyd, as the actor's inappropriate outbursts were termed. Around this time, Lloyd Avery too was staying with Quincy Jones III, the producer and filmmaker known as QDII, who resided in the jungle, where Avery had already become a legend because of his role in Boys and the Hood. He probably got a pass for the fact that he killed someone as a blood on film, says Baldwin C. Sykes, a Compton native who played Monster in Boys and says he receives similar praise because of his character on film. Up to this day, I have people say, "Monster, you shot the blood you represented. You should be down with my hood." And I'm like, I'm not down with a hood. That was an acting role. Avery thought differently, considered Knucklehead number 2 as his claim to fame, a role that defined him. It would be a moment he would relive off-screen. Not long after the release of Boys and the Hood, Lloyd Avery shocked those closest to him by moving away from his middle-class neighborhood and relocating to an area known as the Jungle, the heavily blood-affiliated neighborhoods of Crenshaw Boulevard, Coliseum Street, Santo Tomas Drive, and La Brea Avenue. Lloyd seemed to embrace the culture of his new home. Malcolm Norrington, who played Knucklehead number 1 alongside Avery's Knucklehead number 2 in Boys and the Hood, recalled his co-star during filming. "He was kind of meek. He was not anything near a street guy." Norrington said, "Within a year of Boys, I was hearing about him missing auditions. I don't remember when I heard about him joining a gang. I just remember being perplexed. To me, it was like, what is he doing blooding?" Lloyd. His friend Keith Davis remembers the first time Avery revealed his blood affiliation. "We were shopping at the Slauson Swap Meet," he says. "Some rollin' 60s came up and were like, 'You're the guy from Boys and the Hood.' 'Yeah, that was me.' 'You shot Ricky, right?' 'Yeah, that was me.' 'Hey cuz, you really a blood?' 'Yeah, what's up, blood?' I was looking at him like, what?" Lloyd just kinda laughed. They asked him if he was a blood, and it clicked. Yeah, I'm a blood now. Avery's association with the Bloods gang made little sense considering he grew up near Crip territory. Similarly, he knew the dangers of gangbanging, after the streets had already claimed the life of his younger brother. His elder brother, too, was soon to take the wrong path in life, but on the opposite side his brother would choose. Avery was admitted to UC Berkeley and UCLA after gaining a 3.6 GPA at Beverly Hills High, but decided he wouldn't attend either school. As he stated in a 1992 Los Angeles Times article, he just felt some kind of attraction to the streets. Unlike his younger brother, didn't hang with the rich kids at BHHS, though he claims to have partied with a Menendez brother on prom night. He dressed in Eazy-E cosplay, and although he wasn't gangbanging yet, he felt there was a certain image he had to live up to. Gang affiliation among R&B stars is something that was, and still is, prevalent. However, very few actors have become embroiled in the gang warfare of the streets. In November 1994, Avery's Boys and Poetic Justice co-star Dedrick D. Gobert became involved in a gang-related fight, during which he was shot dead along with a friend after attending an illegal street race. The actor was killed just days before his 23rd birthday. He formed his own crew, the DGFs, which stood for Don't Give a Fucks, and each night these young hoodlums went out looking for trouble after getting wasted. Eventually, Ch became feared. Ch once came to a party with Lloyd and I, Dorian Reed recalls. This whole other gang is there. All of a sudden, Ch starts throwing rocks at them. The other gang was like, "What the fuck is going on?" One of them recognizes Ch and was like, "Ch? Oh, let it go." That whole gang was there, and they didn't fuck with Ch. That's a little insight into how crazy Ch was. Ch soon graduated from the DGFs into the Rollin' 60s, a notorious Crip set from the other side of Slauson. He was expected to put in work, a broad term that even today Ch struggles to explain. If you wanted to establish yourself as someone in your hood to be reckoned with, if you wanted to earn your stripes or even give your neighborhood a name, if you're from a neighborhood and you already have a reputation of being troublemakers or being the toughest, then you have to not only defend your neighborhood, but let's go over here to such and such's neighborhood and put in work without saying too much. Put in work, terrorize them, whatever comes with that. Essentially, putting in work is the price a gang member pays to be accepted, gaining the value of brotherhood that comes with it all, which is the primary appeal of gangs. But putting in work can often result in retaliation, as Ch learned. He had lost 2 close friends to gang violence during the summer of 1990. Afterward, he was consumed with rage and started carrying a .22 caliber revolver, which made him feel untouchable. He committed a series of armed robberies and breaking and entering with his fellow Crips, who referred to him as BK, Blood Killer. Considering how dangerous the lifestyle is, some 30 years later Ch says he feels lucky to be alive. All of the stupid nights just doing stupid shit, every fucking night, he says from his Augusta, Georgia home. Just senseless. Senseless, brother. Despite the wild years of his early adulthood, Ch had the common sense to know that he was a dead man walking unless he renounced gang life. He did so before pleading guilty to 9 felony charges of armed robbery. Over the next 4+ years, Avery served time at different facilities around the California penal system, at Chino, Richard J. Donovan, and Jamestown, where he was tasked with fighting fires alongside other inmates. He soon learnt the harsh realities of prison life. He was robbed of $40 by a Mexican gang. In order to protect himself, he sharpened shanks, but was ratted out by his cellmate and spent some time in the hole. But all these experiences caused him to grow as a person. In prison he learned carpentry and cabinet making, adding to the skills he accrued under his father and at Trade Tech, while also befriending members of former rival sets. When he was released from prison in March 1996, he promised to finish school, start his own business, and work hard. He wanted to be a good person and vowed never go back to the gangland lifestyle. But during the past 57 months, much had changed in his family. "When I went to jail, Lloyd was a goody two-shoes," he says. "By the time I got out, he already had a case." Lloyd Avery had by that time multiple cases pending when his brother was released from prison, and he would soon add burglary and weapons possession charges to his burgeoning arrest record. He had firmly settled into the Jungle, a Bloods-affiliated neighborhood in South Los Angeles, where he was said to have connections with the Black P-Stone set. Established in the late 1960s by O.G. T. Rogers, a former member of the Blackstone Rangers, the Black P-Stones consists of 2 subsets, the Jungles and the City. The Jungles, to whom Avery belonged, are located in the Crenshaw district of South Los Angeles, and their neighborhood is the Baldwin Village apartment complex, behind the Baldwin Hills Crenshaw Plaza, between the Crenshaw Boulevard and La Brea Boulevard. The gang are known to be on good terms with the majority of the other blood sets in the surrounding areas of South Los Angeles, especially the Fruit Town Brims and the Rollin' 20s neighborhood Bloods. They have waged territorial wars against other powerful gangs in South LA, such as the Rollin' 40 Crips, the 18th Street Gang, one of the largest Latino gangs in the city, and the Rollin' 30s Harlem Crips. Surprisingly, Lloyd Avery had the respect an OG earns due to a murder he committed on film, but he was determined to earn his stripes the old-fashioned way. He put in work, and the Bloods gangsters showered him with the attention he craved. He often wore red with Chuck Taylors and khakis, and became as notorious as his on-screen character in Boys. Avery says he once came across someone with Avery's face tattooed on his forearm. Avery had himself inked, tattooing the letter J in Old English font above his left eyebrow. A few weeks later, he filled in the rest, so that the word Junglas was clear for everyone to see. His transition was complete. He was no longer the actor who played the Blood who shot Ricky, but had become the Blood who shot Ricky. His anger and frustration that had festered into criminal activity stemmed from the fact that he desperately wanted to be a star, but was coming to terms with the realization that it wasn't going the way he wanted. Casting opportunities like Boys and the Hood had come so easily that Avery believed every role would come so easily. He rarely prepared for auditions, if he bothered showing up at all. "I auditioned him once," Doran Reed says, and if that's how he was auditioning, he wasn't going to get anything. Avery's music career had also stalled despite his numerous and influential industry connections. Despite appearing in a big blockbuster like Boys, Avery's subsequent acting work was erratic, and he wouldn't appear in another film until 3 years later. That gig was an uncredited role in the Wayans Brothers' 1996 crime comedy film, Don't Be a Menace to South Central, While Drinking Your Juice in the Hood. The film was a parody of movies like Boys and the Hood, Poetic Justice, and Menace to Society, and in this small role Avery played Guy in the Back Seat, in what would be his last acting role for the next 4 years. With his career flagging, Avery still managed to excel at ruining friendships. Singleton retained a fondness for Avery, finding his practical jokes endearing. But Avery continued to antagonize him, even after the stunt he pulled at the Poetic Justice premiere. He called John a punk-ass nigga, Norrington says. It got to the point where John stopped taking Lloyd's calls. As his friends grew up and moved on, Lloyd became increasingly isolated. Even his old roommate QDII distanced himself from Lloyd Avery. He would call my house at random and be like, "I'm the king of the streets. I'm the hardest," QDII once told me. I told him everything is all good, but I had to take a break. By the beginning of 1999, as Avery was turning 30 years of age, he moved into an office building in Santa Barbara Plaza with a shared bathroom down the hall. With his acting work all but dried up, he cashed small residual checks and washed cars for $5 a time. LA police suspected he was also selling crack. He emerged back on the scene in February 1999, starring in an uncredited role as Man in Jail in Eric Mays's comedy film The Breaks. By March 1999, his brother Cha was a father of a 2-year-old son and had returned to school, having won a trade tech scholarship, and was gifted $2,500 in tools. His brother Zanji and little sister Tico had also graduated from college, but Lloyd stayed immersed in the culture of the streets and the gangster lifestyle. Lloyd Avery too fled the jungle in April 1999 after what was described as an altercation with members of the Nation of Islam. He cleaned out his apartment in the middle of the night and stayed at his grandmother's house. Not long after leaving his longtime apartment, he decided to share a Hollywood crash pad with 4 surfer bros he had just met. That arrangement ended when he maced his roommate's mother. Lloyd Avery was out of control, and one time at a nightclub, he also maced former MTV VJ Downtown Julie Brown. His life was in freefall. He would steal a bike or car to get to work, and was said to have packed a gun to a casting call. A witness saw him wielding a gun during an argument on the Venice Beach boardwalk. He seemed violent one minute, then weepy and apologetic the next. He also started going to church, but would rarely make it inside. He would get dressed, go be there, but would leave prior to the lesson and walk around the grounds, Carol Avery, his aunt, remembers. I figured he was struggling and Satan was pulling at him to keep him from hearing the lesson. The double murder in the jungle. By this time he was becoming ever more embroiled in LA gangster violence, and in 1999, he became involved in a real-life gang-related incident when he participated in the murders of 2 drug dealers. Although he no longer lived in the jungle, he still hung out with residents there, and on July 1, 1999, at around 4 p.m., Avery approached Annette Lewis and Percy Branch, who were sitting under a tree near Santa Barbara Plaza. According to police reports, after a short argument, allegedly over a drug debt, Avery pulled out a .45 caliber pistol. He fired his weapon at Lewis before turning it on Branch, who was shot in the stomach. Lewis died later that day, while Branch passed away 3 weeks later due to complications from his gunshot wounds. Surprisingly, Avery didn't go into hiding after the murders, and instead went on to film 2 movies while on the run. While staying at his grandmother's house, he received some unexpected good news from his agent at Privileged Talent and Models that he had booked a movie role in New Mexico. 13 days after the murders of Lewis and Branch, Avery was on set for the filming on Lockdown, which started on July 14, 1999, in Cell Block 4 of the Penitentiary of New Mexico. This location was the scene of one of the deadliest prison riots in United States history. It was known as the Old Main, and this section of the prison was closed down in 1998. But there were still relics of the violence, such as the axe marks from where snitches were decapitated. The atmosphere on set was tense. When filming wrapped for the day, the crew would often unwind at a local bar. Lloyd Avery too refused to mix with the crew, preferring to remain in his hotel room. On the one rare occasion he attended, he ended up fighting with one of the lead actors, DeAndre Bonds. The scuffle was broken up by the tattoo artist on set, which led to Avery feuding with the hair and makeup department. He said he was going to find me and my family when we got back to LA, says makeup department head Melanie Mills, and that he was going to murder us. Avery had already made himself a pariah on set, having scrapped with Gabriel Cassius following their fight scene, and threw a tantrum after filming the scene during which his character Nate was thrown into a freezer. But possibly his biggest mistake was continuously antagonizing Percy Miller, known as Master P, one of the stars and producers of the film. P's guys would come to me and say, "Do you want us to fuck him up?" says director John Lewessenhop, who told them, "No, please leave him alone." As a result, the producers cut some of Avery's scenes, and he was soon to be thrown off set. On the day Lloyd Avery was fired from the set of Lockdown, he was spotted by crew smoking a Sherm stick on the back of a grip truck during his lunch break, while blasting music from a stolen boombox. When he was asked to return the radio, Avery stormed into the makeup room and lunged towards Melanie Mills. Before he could reach her, he was intercepted by the tattoo artist, who punched him in the face and splattering blood everywhere. Avery was then chased off the set by Master P's entourage and run toward the new prison facility down the road. Dressed in full wardrobe as a prisoner, Avery scaled a tall barbed wire fence. At that moment, sirens began blaring and guns were drawn. Avery had unwittingly infiltrated a working prison. The film's line producer, Eric Abrahamson, a former Navy SEAL demolition expert, had to plead with guards and expert snipers to stand down. Once subdued, Avery was ordered to leave the state of New Mexico. Despite the humiliation of getting fired from lockdown and practically being escorted out of state, Avery felt optimistic about his acting career upon returning to LA. He started attending auditions and even wrote a movie script titled G in a Bottle. Christine Chapman, his agent at Privileged Talent and Models, the Beverly Hills firm that represented Avery, described it as like Kazam, that movie where Shaq was a genie. This kid finds a bottle, and out comes this ex-gang member who changed his ways. It was actually kind of good, she says. Avery befriended and eventually moved in with Chapman's son, an aspiring model named Sean Spracker. After a night of partying, Avery crashed at the studio apartment of Spracker's childhood friend, Jeremy McLaughlin, another privileged client. For the next 3 months or so, he didn't leave. We couldn't really do much about it, Spracker says. No one wanted to confront him. The struggling actor and rapper had seemed personally and professionally lost since his debut in Boys. Then things appeared to brighten up, albeit momentarily. Avery landed what was to be his most influential role to date, as the gangster G-Ride in the 2001 independent low-budget indie film Shot, which documented life on the dangerous streets of South Central LA. Roger Roth, the film's writer and director, says he was impressed by Avery's audition, who had underplayed his emotions during the scene he read. Roth had found the actor who would be his G-Ride. In the movie, G-Ride allows a white photographer named Robert, played by Brandon Carr, essentially a stand-in for Roth, to ride with his gang and document life in the hood. Avery would be the ideal method actor for the role. He asked Roth to address him as G-Ride and kept his prop gun tucked into his waistband. The role came naturally to Avery, and it showed in his performance. He's one of the best actors I ever worked with, Roth says. He could nail every line. He could make you believe it. He could make you feel it. For the first time since he starred in Boys, Avery became completely invested in a project. He demanded the final product be real and authentic, and would protest when a line of dialogue or a costume felt anything less than the real McCoy. In an effort to pander to him, Roth went along with his decision. Avery would also serve as a technical advisor on the film, working with director Roger Roth, and perhaps offering up his own experience of gang-related life in the jungle. To get it right, he pestered Avery with questions about the hood and even his own past. I asked him if he was ever involved in killing. He just gave a smirk, says Roth. I even thought it was kind of cool. It didn't register, the heaviness of having to kill someone. Before long, the relationship between star and director came to mirror that of G-Ride and Robert. Avery started to bully and intimidate Roth. On several occasions, he promised he would kill him. I'm going to wait until your ass motherfucking thinks that I motherfucking forgot about it, motherfucker, Avery would tell Roth. As for how he planned to kill him, Roth says, I don't repeat the threat. I don't even tell the people closest to me. This way, I just know it died with him. Reflecting on the time he spent with Avery, Roth has few words to say. He remembers sitting in his car, crying, paralyzed with fear, or the nights he spent sleeping in his secret editing suite. Every hair on my arm is standing, and my entire face is numb, he says. I feel like he's here right now. I've never felt that way before. I believe in the afterlife, so that's possible. When I think back on Lloyd, I think it's one of the greatest missed opportunities, Roth says. Had he been able to control himself and not commit a double murder, there is no doubt he would have been a big success. But Lloyd Avery had much on his mind, and the past was catching up with this actor turned gangster turned acting gangster, who all that time had been harboring his dark secret. People I ran into were always like, what's going on with Lloyd? It seems like he's self-destructing, says his younger brother, Cher Avery. The double murder was still being investigated by LA detectives, and when the wanted posters went up in the fall of 1999, Avery was couch surfing with friends and family. Cher remembers the last night he spent with his brother as a free man. The two were sitting in the two-car garage of their grandmother's house on Crescent Heights Boulevard near Beverly Hills. As they sat, talked, and smoked hits from a bong, Cher recalled his older brother saying, I've had a good life, as they both continued to smoke weed. You want to hear something scary? Lloyd asked him, but his brother knew that Los Angeles detectives had been searching for his brother to speak with him. It seemed like he wanted to get something off his chest, but Cher was worried about what he might say. I don't want to hear that shit, Cher muttered, and pulled out a pocket knife, brandishing it in the air, indicating he wanted to cut the conversation short. Nothing more was said that evening, and Lloyd spent the night sleeping on the floor in his grandmother's bedroom. The LAPD were aware of exactly where Lloyd was hiding out, and the next morning they moved to make an arrest. Just said he remembered the helicopters that morning were louder than usual, and there was lots of traffic outside his grandmother's house. Lloyd was in the kitchen with his bike, and before he left through the back door, he gave his brother one last hug, but nothing more was said about the previous night. He made his way up Crescent Heights Boulevard, making a U-turn where he pulled alongside the driver's side door of police cruiser. He then brazenly leaned forward and asked the officer, "What's up?" as he released his grip on the handlebars of his aluminium mongoose. Just then the officer opened his door, and Lloyd stumbled momentarily before recovering quickly, speeding west in an attempt to elude the pursuing police vehicle. He soon collided with another police car and was placed under arrest for the double murders. Instead of just being a Hollywood-like studio gangster, he was living at Sedcha. "My brother turned into a for real gangster," he added. It appeared Lloyd Avery never got over playing Knucklehead number 2, and it really was a case of art imitating life, with him living the same type of lifestyle as his gun-wielding character in Singleton's film. The date of Avery's arrest was December 8, 1999. He had been apprehended following a tip from Sean Spracker. The roommates had previously had a falling out after Avery maced Spracker's mother, Christine Chapman, his own agent, during an argument at the privileged offices. Avery considered his arrest to be fate. By that time in his life he had lost his way, and he knew that prison offered him a chance to turn his life around, as it once did for his brother Cha. While Avery was awaiting trial, he was incarcerated at the North County Correctional Facility, and there he found God and salvation in Chaplain Dennis Clark's congregation. Clark, the senior chaplain at the county jail, first noticed Avery sitting in the front row during Bible study. Soon he was speaking often with Clark in the prison chaplain office about what he was reading in the Bible. Clark says that whenever Avery committed himself to something, he went all in, and religion was no different. His faith was as real as any man's faith I've ever known. After 2 years at the jail, he went to trial in December 2000. During each morning in court, Avery carried his Bible, with highlighted passages and scribbles he had made in the margin. From the start of the prosecution's opening statement, it appeared that a different Lloyd Avery was being judged, not the devout Christian that emerged in jail whom other inmates had nicknamed Baby Jesus. The Lloyd Avery being tried was the blood who shot Ricky. "What is this case about?" Deputy District Attorney Hoon Chun asked the jury. "You've heard the phrase art imitating life. Well, this is a case about life imitating and even exceeding art." Despite the fact that the prosecution had evidence from 3 eyewitnesses, there appeared to be credibility issues, including the star witness who had asked for money in exchange for testimony. While another eyewitness claimed that the shooter was 5 feet 7 inches and dark-skinned, Branch, the victim who died 3 weeks after the shooting, adamantly told police that Avery wasn't the shooter. The murder weapon was never recovered, and police accidentally destroyed shell casings from 2 shootings involving Avery from the spring of 1999, a shootout at the Islamic Center and a drive-by on Hillcrest Avenue, both of which alleged to have been a match to the ballistics from the murders. "It's an embarrassment, certainly," Judge Robert J. Perry said from the bench. "It is shoddy police work, unquestionably." Lloyd Avery took the stand in his own defense, claiming he was somewhere in Hollywood at the time of the murder, and then clashed with Deputy District Attorney Chun, who claimed that such a weak alibi offered little to prove his whereabouts. At the conclusion of the proceedings, Avery was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He arrived at Pelican Bay State Prison in March 2001. During his time there, Lloyd Avery kept out of trouble and was mostly preoccupied with spreading God's word to his fellow inmates, something that would ultimately cause his death. In August 2005, Avery was paired up in a double cell with another inmate. This cellmate was Kevin Roby, an Air Force Academy dropout and paranoid schizophrenic, serving a life sentence for the horrific rape and murder of his sister in January 1987. During his time in prison, Roby had found a different faith to Avery, that of Satanism. The devout Avery believed that divine providence had offered him an opportunity in this living arrangement. "I know God has him around me for a reason," he wrote to Chaplain Clark in a letter dated August 29, 2005. "He knows very well that I am a devout Christian, and I pray for him to the Lord every day that he gives his life to God." What happened next is mostly known from Kevin Roby's own account, where he claims that Avery had apparently tried to convert him, albeit unsuccessfully, and was warned by Roby to stop preaching about God. On the evening of Sunday, September 4, 2005, these spiritual disputes between Avery and Roby turned violent. "He was pushing his agenda to convert me to Christianity," which led to us fighting, Roby would later explain. This violent altercation ended with Roby choking Avery unconscious, causing him to bleed into his lungs. He then placed Avery's body in bed under the covers, so as not to alert the guards to his death. Over the next day and a half, correctional officers made 11 counts of the inmates, which including a standing count at 4:30 p.m. on the Monday. During each of these counts, Avery was tallied. With his cellmate dead, Roby ate double rations and even wrote a flirtatious letter to one of Avery's pen pals. In his later statement to prison authorities, Roby then tied a string around Avery's arm and tugged his limbs like a marionette in order to fool the correctional officers into believing he was still alive. Shortly before the Tuesday noon count, Roby removed the body from the bunk and positioned it onto a pentagram that he had drawn on the cell block floor. As part of the ceremony he undertook, Kevin Roby painted the cell walls with Avery's blood, as part of a satanic ritual intended as a warning to God. Years later, Roby said, "He is next on the agenda once I accomplish what I want to accomplish in this realm." It took correctional officers approximately 38 hours to find the body of Lloyd Avery. When officers entered their cell, Roby was handcuffed and Avery's body was transferred to the infirmary, and they administered CPR despite the fact that he was already decomposing. He was pronounced dead at 12:10 p.m. Avery's family, including his brother Che and mother Linda, doubted the official version of the circumstances surrounding Lloyd's death. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation's CDCR listed the cause of death as aspiration of blood, with blunt force trauma as a contributing factor. The Avery family conducted a private autopsy, which stated the cause of death as blunt force trauma complicated by aspiration of blood. It also made mention of the injury to Avery's skull, describing the 1.5-inch abrasion on his temple as suggestive of either a blow due to a flat surface, such as a carpenter's hammer, or impact on a similar type surface. The mention of a carpenter's hammer led to some, including the Avery family, to believe that it was possible Roby hadn't acted alone. But the blunt force trauma described from such a weapon is similar to the type of wounds caused by Avery's head being banged on the stainless steel sink in their cell. A later CDCR investigation found no evidence that correctional officers played any part in the death of Lloyd Avery II. Hoping that a trial would provide them with answers as to the circumstances of the death of their loved one, the family urged local authorities to file charges against Roby. The Del Norte County District Attorney refused, citing the fact that Roby had both confessed to the crimes and was not eligible for the death penalty. The family appealed to the state attorney general, who were inclined to agree with the local DA's decision. They considered filing a wrongful death lawsuit, but the civil rights movement NAACP, as well as the law firm of Johnny Cochran, decided against representing the Avery family. Around this time, the CDCR conducted 2 investigations under the supervision of the California Inspector General Office's Bureau of Independent Review, one into the circumstances of Avery's death, and the other on the conduct of the correctional officers. This report, released in early 2007, found that the correctional officers failed to follow basic procedures and guidelines, such as removing Avery's body before photographing the crime scene, and most importantly, for failing to notice he had been dead in his cell for 38 hours before his discovery. Following an appeal, 5 of the officers involved were found guilty of misconduct and received disciplinary action ranging from a 5% pay cut for 45 days to a 10% pay cut for a 6-month period. When Linda Avery, mother of Lloyd, heard about the officers' punishment, she said, "So they just got a little tap on the hand." Crazy. When contacted in November 2020, the correctional officer who found Avery's body refused to comment, saying, "I have nothing to say about it, man. I'm retired. It's no longer a part of my life." Another correctional officer who had knowledge of the incident and who asked to remain anonymous said that miscounts are not uncommon. "These prisoners are assholes," he said in 2007. "These aren't nice people. So you're trying to get your count done, and there is one person who refuses to stand. Are you going to count him?" he asks. "We like a quiet day. We cherish a quiet day. I know all these officers involved in this case. They didn't do this on purpose. Was it lazy? Sure. Do they have absolute regret? Yes. To me, if there is any mystery here, it's why was Roby taken from a single cell status to being in a double? Who cleared it? Prison officials don't clear it. That's management." That same year, 2007, Pelican Bay administration officials declined to answer questions concerning the matter, citing third-party confidentiality and other individual privacy concerns. Kevin Roby received another life sentence and remains at Pelican Bay Prison, where he continues to sign his letters Satanic Christ, believing himself, in his own words, to be the prophesied killer of God and the rightful ruler of this universe. In letters, he has described how it was necessary to perform 2 rituals over the body of Lloyd Avery in order to fulfill some satanic prophecy. He claims he is not a devil worshipper, but insists he is the Christ of darkness. Many of the questions surrounding Lloyd Avery's death have never been answered. Avery's family still cannot understand how he landed in prison in the first place. No one could put their finger on it, says Doran Reed, one of Avery's closest friends. People that knew Lloyd were like, what the fuck? How did Lloyd turn into a gangster? His brother Ches kept some of Lloyd's belongings in his garage, such as the BMX bike he was riding the morning of his arrest, as well as the Bible he studied in prison. He says it was his big brother who brought him closer to God, closer to believing in Jesus. He remembers his brother fondly, and even named his youngest son Lloyd. Looks just like him too, Ches says. It's a good name. I didn't want it to get lost. Wanted to hand it down. In the 15 years since his murder, Avery has become a hood legend, and the story of his life and death have become something akin to movie lore. The question of how Lloyd Avery turned into a gangster has never been adequately answered. Avery likens his brother's descent into gang life to that of Tupac Shakur. I like to call it the Tupac syndrome, he says. He, Lloyd, felt like he had something to prove when he really didn't. Even if you have money and fame, you will sacrifice all of that just to have respect from a bunch of thugs. The aspiring actor turned gangbanger had chosen to live a violent life and ended up dying a particularly violent death. Case 5. Between 1978 to 1981, Ruth Finley, a quiet Wichita housewife, claimed she was being stalked by an unknown menace. During her ordeal, Ruth had been harassed, kidnapped, and assaulted by an individual who the police dubbed the Poet, because of the rhyming letters that were sent by the perpetrator. It was during this same time that the city of Wichita was still under the shadow of the serial killer known as BTK, who stalked his victims before strangling them in their own homes. It was suspected there might be some link to BTK and the Finley case, but the truth was much more complex and led to one of the most baffling and bizarre cases in Wichita history. The Finleys lived in a quiet neighborhood in Wichita, Kansas, and led seemingly unassuming lives. Ruth was a quiet, soft-spoken 48-year-old who worked in the security department at a phone company. Her 50-year-old husband Ed was an accountant, and together they had raised 2 sons who had grown up and moved away from home. No one would assume that the Finleys had any enemies, so when they walked into the police department on November 6, 1978, to report that Ruth was being harassed, they were at a loss to determine why anyone would do such a thing. They claimed Ruth was receiving harassing phone calls and threatening letters, and they brought one with them to show the officers. Here's to you, my tender Valentine, red with blood and tied with twine. Nothing too much for a Valentine. Gone from here by a whim of mine. The police took the matter seriously and registered the complaint, but with no leads they took no further action. At this time the police were dealing with a far more insidious and dangerous threat, which was stalking Wichita. The BTK Strangler had been active since 1974 and was still communicating with the authorities, sending letters to the media to feed his fame-hungry need for recognition. The previous year, in December 1977, BTK had claimed his 7th victim when he murdered Nancy Fox in her South Pershing Street home. He then immediately telephoned the emergency hotline, telling the emergency dispatcher, "Go to 843 South Pershing. You will find a homicide, Nancy Fox," then hung up. The police found Fox dead in her home, strangled with a nylon stocking wrapped tightly around her neck in what was BTK's signature. Later, on January 31, 1978, the killer mailed a letter to the Withita Eagle-Beacon in which he suggested several names for himself, and then sent another on February 10, 1978, to the local television channel Cake TV Channel 10. In this letter, BTK was furious at the lack of exposure of his crimes, due to the Wichita police not wishing to admit there was a serial killer on the loose. They were now faced with the prospect of revealing to the public the existence of BTK after he wrote, "How many do I have to kill before I get my name in the paper or national attention?" On the November 21, 1978, the case took an alarming turn when Ed Finley reported his wife missing. Several hours later, Ruth reappeared, visible shaken by her ordeal. She told police that she had been abducted by 2 men while she was shopping in downtown Wichita. She said they drove her around for 4 hours before she was able to escape. Unable to give the investigators a description of either suspect, the police decided to step up their surveillance of the Finleys for Ruth's own protection. The police were now faced with the possibility that BTK was behind the harassment and abduction of Ruth Finley. But there were also doubts, most notably the diversion of MO in the assault on Ruth. BTK was a home invasion killer and did not abduct his victims off the street. Secondly, he always killed his victims, leaving only the young V and children alive because he later claimed he was interrupted. Investigators came to the conclusion that BTK and the poet were not one and the same. Even with the increased police presence, the letters from the poet continued and became even more sinister. The river is searched for the perished. Whores will hate me, but by men I will be cherished. Viper thoughts coil round my mind. Torture and agony are unkind. For 5 weeks the police conducted a thorough surveillance of Ruth, and during that time nothing untoward happened, and the operation was called off. The letters continued, but no dramatic developments occurred until August 1979. On August 31st, Ruth was admitted to the St. Joseph Medical Center with 3 knife wounds, one of which was nearly fatal after it punctured her kidney. She was kept in hospital for 9 days and told police that a man had attacked her in a local mall parking lot. The police stepped up their investigation, and Ed Finley's employer offered a $3,000 reward for information that led to the apprehension of Ruth's attacker. Meanwhile, the police sent copies of the poet's letters to a psycholinguistics consultant. Dr. Murray Myron had gained prominence when he worked on the Son of Sam case after examining the letters sent by the killer. He made several cursory observations about the poet, stating that the letter writer was severely psychotic, schizophrenic, wily, pathological, paranoid, and a loner with a deep feeling of persecution. During 1980, the harassment of the Finley reached an unprecedented level of intensity. It started as minor incidents when eggs, and later feces, were thrown at the Finleys' home. A jar of urine was left on the Finleys' front porch, and Ed discovered an unignited Molotov cocktail on their rear porch, whilst hair and firecrackers were found in the mailbox. During December 1980, the Finleys' Christmas wreath was set on fire. It then escalated to more alarming behavior outside of the home, when embarrassingly, the health department was contacted and notified that Ruth was spreading venereal disease. Then a local mortuary was contacted by someone claiming Ruth wished to learn more about their services. Eventually it became more threatening when their phone line was cut, and Ruth found a knife wrapped in a newspaper left by her work office. One day they made a sinister discovery outside the house. It was the poet's trademark, a piece of red bandana. The Finleys were distraught at these events and requested more police protection, but they had very little information to go on. The police compiled a composite based on Ruth's description of her attacker, and suspects were questioned and then released. They installed a camera in the backyard, and Ruth and Ed spent several evenings watching their back door, but nothing happened. The police chief Richard Lemunyon had not become personally involved in the case. However, that changed in the summer of 1981 when the poet began sending letters to others, including his wife Sharon. On September 5th, he decided to take home the 15-volume case files on the poet and studied them over the weekend. He then came to a startling conclusion. On the September 17th, the Finleys are placed under secret surveillance by the Wichita Police Department. A helicopter observed Ed driving the couple to a mailbox where Ruth mailed 5 letters. These letters were retrieved by the police, and the stamps were later revealed to have come from the same book located in the Finley home. 3 of the letters were either bills or private correspondence, but 2 of the letters were from the poet. A later search of Ruth's workplace office revealed more swatches of red bandana cloth. On October 1st, Ed Finley was summoned to police headquarters and questioned. He voluntarily took a polygraph test, which he passed and was cleared of any involvement. That same day, Ruth was also questioned and confronted with the evidence from her office and the letters she mailed. After more than an hour of questioning, Detective Mike Hill turned to Ruth and said, "Ruth, it's time you tell me why. Ruthie, look at me. I am not mad at you. Ruth, I don't know why you are doing this, but we got to find out why." Ruth then broke down in tears, confessed to being the poet, and admitted she needed help. "Yes, I wasn't sure I was guilty, but I did know something was very wrong with me," she told the detectives. "I wish I were dead. I guess I am just crazy." Chief Lemunyon surmised it could only have been Ruth because there were too many coincidences that pointed to either Ed or Ruth. When the police installed a camera in the couple's garden, the poet switched to targeting the front of the house. Even though it had cost the police $370,000 and took 3 years of investigation, they decided they would file no charges against Ruth on the provision that she would voluntarily seek psychiatric help at St. Joseph Medical Center. On November 2, 1981, Ruth entered into a psychotherapy course with Dr. Andrew Pickens. Under the care of Dr. Pickens, Ruth found it difficult to express herself, and with his support, she began to write poems which were the key to understanding her behavior and manifestation of the poet. Hickory dickory dock. The hands fell off the clock. Run from the man and get away. My legs are gone, so I have to stay. The potty was warm and red. Hide the mess on the bed. I hate him. He feels like a railroad track. The red bandana would be revealed to be the catalyst for her psychosis. During sessions, Ruth revealed a normal childhood which was marred by abuse. This abuse had not come from her parents. Her father, Carl Smock, had been a farmer, and her mother, Faye, had been a housewife. Dr. Pickens was able to help Ruth pinpoint the association of the red bandana and its significance. When Ruth was 3.5 years old, she began to receive special attention from a family friend, who was also a neighbor of the Smock family. This neighbor began to groom Ruth, first by playing innocuous games of hide and seek, and began to tie her to the bed with a red bandana. For several months, Ruth was sexually abused by this man, who would stuff the red bandana in her mouth to keep her quiet and threaten her to keep quiet about the abuse. During these instances of rape, Ruth disassociated herself from the abuse and remembered a feeling of floating above her bed, watching herself and believing it was someone else and wasn't happening to her. Ruth's older brother Carl remembers a conversation their parents had, during which the neighbor was discussed. He remembers their father telling their mother, "He wouldn't do anything like that," referring to the neighbor. It was after this that the visits to the neighbors stopped and Ruth's abuse ended, but it left her with deep psychological scars. She used poetry as a way to keep her bad thoughts a secret from others, only to be used during times of stress, keeping a poetry book she was gifted hidden in the family barn. Her way of disassociating herself from the negative thoughts came at great times of traumatic stress. It is believed that several factors triggered this psychological defense mechanism. Firstly, Ed was hospitalized in 1978 with a suspected heart attack, and the BTK strangler was active with the community. Dr. Pickens believes these events unleashed Ruth's manifestation of the poet as a way of dealing with emotions she had repressed since her childhood. He also believes it was a way for Ruth to get the protection she needed from both Ed and the police, by subconsciously using the poet as an external threat. Ruth was fully able to perpetrate the actions of the poet, without realizing she was doing anything wrong, whilst keeping the trauma of her past hidden. After more than 5 years of treatment, Ruth Finley was able to come to terms with her memories of what happened during her childhood, and was supported by her family, friends, and co-workers. The YOGTZ case began when Gunther Stoll, an unemployed German food engineer from Anshausen, began suffering from an acute case of paranoid throughout 1984, and often spoke to his wife about people who wanted to do him harm, and was clearly fearing for his life. One day in October 1984, Stoll declared to his wife that he finally understood something. He wrote 6 letters on a piece of paper, which spelled out the phrase YOGTZ. Gunther then quickly crossed it out, and without explaining further, he left his home to visit a public house in Wilmsdorf. It would be the last time his wife saw him alive, and his subsequent and mysterious death has never been fully explained. Not much is known of Gunther Stoll until the events prior to his mysterious death. He was a 34-year-old from Germany who had previously worked as a food service engineer and lived in Anshausen with his wife. For some time he had been suffering from the effects of acute paranoia, and often spoke to his wife about his fears, making reference to them and those on numerous occasions. Sadly, he never clarified these suspicions except for telling his wife, "They're on my tail," and alluding that these people wanted to do something to him, possibly harmful. These fears culminated on October 25, 1984, when Stoll was sitting in the armchair of the bedroom at his family home at shortly before 11 p.m., when he suddenly rose to his feet and in the presence of his wife exclaimed in a loud voice, "Now I'm getting a light," or "Now I've got it. Jetzt get mir ein Licht auf." He then wrote down 6 letters on a piece of paper spelling out the word YOGTZ before crossing it out. Shortly after this, Stoll left the house and went to his favorite pub in Wilmsdorf, where he ordered himself a beer and promptly fell off his chair to the ground, injuring his face. It's believed he was not under the influence of alcohol, and several witnesses later testified how he lost consciousness. When he woke, he said to the innkeeper and other patrons that he had suddenly gone. After this, he abruptly left the pub and drove away in his light blue VW Golf I, but his whereabouts during this time are unknown. His next known movements were around 1 a.m. when he appeared in Hagerseelbach, where he grew up. He visited an acquaintance, an old woman he knew from his childhood, who lived in the vicinity of his parents' house and who was very religious. He confided in her that he foresaw a terrible event that night, telling her, "Something's going to happen tonight, something pretty terrifying." Because of the early hour of his visit and his confused demeanor, the old woman advised him to go to his parents' house and speak with them, but Stoll refused, saying they would not understand his concerns. Instead, he said he would go home and speak with his wife, and then left. Around 3 a.m., Stoll's car was discovered by two truck drivers near the Hagenset exit, over 100 kilometers from Hagerseelbach. It had been crashed into a trench adjacent to the A45, and both truck drivers would later testify that they saw an injured person wearing a white jacket walking near the crashed vehicle. Whilst one truck driver went to contact law enforcement, the other checked on the wreckage and found Stoll inside, severely injured and without clothing. He was barely conscious, but was able to explain that 4 other male individuals had been in the car with him, but had run away. When he was asked if they were his friends, he denied it. On the way to the hospital, Stoll died from his injuries. During the subsequent investigation, detectives surmised this was no routine traffic accident. Firstly, it was unexplained why Stoll was found naked, and secondly, his injuries were not consistent with the circumstances in which his car was found, meaning he was injured elsewhere before the accident, and then placed in his car afterwards and driven to the location where he was finally discovered. Because of the lack of clothing, it was determined he was naked during the time he was run over, and then placed in the passenger seat of his own car. Other drivers reported seeing a hitchhiker near the Hagenset exit, but neither this person or the man seen wearing the white jacket has never been formally identified. Other drivers reportedly saw a pickup truck at a ramp at Hagen South, heading in the direction of Frankfurt. However, this vehicle was never located. Investigators looked into Stoll's history, but he had no criminal record, and they discounted any contact with drug dealers as the purpose of his holidays trips to the Netherlands, or a factor in his death. The meaning of the note, and the letters YOGTZ left by Stoll at his home, has remained an equally mysterious element to a confounding case, and the word has not been found in any language. Stoll's wife claimed she discarded the note on the night of his death. However, a copy was made based on her memory. It has been proposed that the G was actually intended to be the number 6, and this actually stood for the call sign of a Romanian radio station, YO6TZ, but has never been linked to the events which occurred in the Siegerland that night. On April 12, 1985, the YOGTZ case was presented on the popular German television show Case File XY, and ever since has remained one of the most mysterious cases in German criminal history. The lead investigator from Hagen has followed over 1,200 leads, but nothing has led to any meaningful conclusion. However, every year the case is re-examined by the Attorney General's office in the hopes of finally cracking the case. The case featured in the German magazine Stern in 2017 and has continued to capture the public's imagination, and armchair sleuths have continued to debate about the meaning of Stoll's YOGTZ note, believing what was written must have some meaning and could possibly explain his unsolved death. Case 6. Pedro Alonso Lopez was born on October 8, 1948 in Tolmia, Colombia, as the 7th of 13 children. His mother was a prostitute who kept her children in line through the use of violence. At this time, the country was in the grip of civil war, which would continue for over 10 years and became known as the La Violencia period, resulting in the deaths of over 200,000. In 1957, 8-year-old Pedro was caught by his mother sexually abusing his younger sister. He would later admit, "My mother threw me out when I was 8 after she caught me touching my sister's breasts. She took me to the edge of town, but I found my way home again." When he returned home, his mother took him on a bus journey to Bogota, Colombia's capital city, which was more than 200 miles away from home where she left him. Alone, he was picked up by a stranger who offered him food and a bed, which he readily accepted. Instead, the older man took him to a deserted house and repeatedly sodomized him. It was after this incident, being raped over and over again, that he decided to do the same to as many young girls as possible. It is unknown when he first became a murderer, but when he was 12 he was taken in by an American family who found him begging on the streets and enrolled him into a school for orphans. But he ran away after 2 years because he was molested by a male teacher. He now lived on the streets and began to steal cars to support himself, but was arrested when he was 18 and sentenced to 3 years in a Colombian jail in 1966. Whilst he was in prison, Pedro Lopez was gang raped by 3 other prisoners. He vowed revenge and hunted them down, slitting their throats within the prison walls. He was never suspected of these murders and faced no added time to his sentence, and was eventually released in 1969. It was during this time that he allegedly began murdering young girls. He traveled between Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, and would stalk marketplaces where he lured away his young victims with promises of gifts and trinkets such as hand mirrors. His young victims were usually between the ages of 9 and 12, and would follow him to his secret hideaways where he had previously prepared graves. Sometimes there were bodies of earlier victims lying in the shallow pits, and there he would rape and then strangle the girls. In 1978, he was captured by Ayachuco's Indians when he attempted to abduct a 9-year-old girl from their North Peruvian community. The Ayachuco's tribal laws dictated that anyone caught for such a crime would be sentenced to death, a punishment which involved being buried alive. He was beaten and stripped of his clothing by the Indians, and Lopez later recounted how they had placed syrup on me and were going to let me be eaten by ants. He was buried up to his neck, but was saved by an American Christian missionary who came to the tribe and convinced them to hand him over to the Peruvian police. They begrudgingly accepted, and he was placed, tied up, in the back of her jeep. She then drove him to the Colombian border and inexplicably let him go. He would later comment, "I didn't hurt her because she was too old to attract me." He was now free to continue his murderous spree and moved between his native Colombia and Ecuador. In 1979, a river overflowed near the town of Ambato in Ecuador, and the bodies of 4 girls were washed up on the riverbank. The police investigation found the young girls had been strangled with such force that with 3 of them their eyes had popped out of their sockets. The 4th girl was found with her eyes frozen open with a look of terror on her face. On March 9, 1980, Pedro Lopez was arrested by police in Ecuador for the attempted abduction of a 12-year-old girl. The mother of the girl, Carvina Poveda, observed Lopez leaving the Plaza Rosa marketplace with her 12-year-old daughter, Maria. She summoned help from other townspeople who followed Pedro Lopez and eventually apprehended him. When police arrived to take him into custody, they found him being held by a large group of people. Put in jail, Lopez refused to speak with police, and detectives decided to trick him into confessing. To discover if he was responsible for the murder of the girls found on the riverbank, they placed a priest, Pastor Gonzalez, within his cell in prison clothes as an undercover inmate. Gonzalez told him he was jailed for rape in an attempt to gain his trust. At first, Lopez did not reveal anything, but slowly he began to open up to his new cellmate and began to tell him details of his crimes. For a month, Gonzalez was undercover and would later reveal, "For 27 days I hardly slept, afraid I'd be strangled in my bed, but I tricked Lopez into confessing." By April 1980, he was boasting of committing murders in Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru, and Gonzalez said, "It was beyond my wildest nightmares. He told me everything." He initially confessed to the murders of 110 girls, but later admitted to a further 240 murders, and eventually agreed to take police to some of the graves of his victims. Skeptical officers were soon under no doubt he was telling the truth when he led them to the bodies of 53 girls buried within the region of Ambato. Shackled in irons, he told police there were more graves, and he offered to take them to locate more bodies. Over the next 3 months, they conducted a thorough search of another 28 more sites, but nothing more was found, which they attributed to the result of scavenging by predatory animals. But they now believed Pedro Lopez's claims, and Major Victor Lascano, director of the Ambato prison, explained, "If someone confesses to 53 you find and hundreds more you don't, you tend to believe what he says." Director Lascano also spoke with reporters telling them, "I think his estimate of 300 is very low, because in the beginning he cooperated with us and took us each day to 3 or 4 hidden corpses. But then he changed his mind, and stopped helping." Newspapers reported in July 1980 that Pedro Lopez had led police to the shallow graves of his 53 victims in the Andean provinces of Tungurahua, Cotopaxi, Chimborazo, Pichincha, and Imbatura. The Quito newspapers were now calling him the Monster of the Andes, and reported he was being kept in the jail at Ambato, capital of Tungurahua province about 75 miles south of Quito, since the first week of March. A police spokesman said he was being held in Ambada until a court determines what charges are to be brought against him. Although he was originally charged with 53 murders on January 25, 1981, authorities decided to admit his detailed confession of another 110 committed in Ecuador into account, and in 1983, he was sentenced life imprisonment, which carries a maximum sentence of 20 years under Ecuadorian law. He would spend most of his time in prison in solitary confinement, rarely interacting with other prisoners or guards because of a 25,000-pound bounty placed on his head by the relatives of his victims. In 1992, Pedro Lopez was interviewed in Ambada by Ron Leitner, a correspondent with the National Examiner. Leitner was allowed access to Lopez in his cell to question him about the crimes he was accused of committing. However, before he would consent to be interviewed, he told the warden he had not touched a woman for almost 12 years and would only continue if he could touch the hands of his daughter. The warden accepted, and with the guards keeping their guns on Pedro Lopez through the bars, he was permitted his request. The young woman held out her hands, and the monster carefully touched her wrists with the tips of his fingers, and Leitner noticed how big and strong his hands were, abnormally so. He then released her and agreed to talk to Leitner, telling him at 26 the warden's daughter was too old to interest him. He began talking about his childhood, and admitted that witnessing acts of prostitution while growing up had a disturbing effect on his mental psyche. He details the instances of rape he was subjected to, and that after his jail term, he began murdering young girls in Peru. "I lost my innocence at age 8, he said, so I decided to do the same to as many young girls as I could. He said that by 1978, he had killed over 100 in Peru alone when he was captured by the Ayachucos tribe and almost buried alive. He said he then moved back to Colombia and later Ecuador, where he began killing about 3 girls a week. He told Leitner, "I like the girls in Ecuador. They are more gentle and trusting, more innocent. They are not as suspicious of strangers as Colombian girls." By his best estimates, he had killed 110 girls in Peru, 110 in Colombia, and over 100 more in Ecuador, and would go into detail about his crimes, explaining how he would capture and kill his young victims. He said he would walk amongst the markets and search for a girl with a certain look on her face, a look of innocence and beauty. He would often choose girls who would be working alongside her mother. "I followed them, sometimes for 2 or 3 days, waiting for the moment when she was left alone. I would give her a pretty, shining trinket, then get her to leave with me for the edge of town, where I had promised to give her another trinket for her mother." He gained the trust of his victims, and once he had them alone, he would hold them in his arms, like a loving parent. He explained, "At the first sign of light I would get excited. I forced the girl into sex and put my hands around her throat. When the sun rose I would strangle her. It was only good if I could see her eyes." He also said he never killed any of his victims at night, because he wanted to watch their last moments during daylight. "It would have been wasted in the dark. I had to watch them by daylight," he explained. He said it would take 5 to 15 minutes for the girls to die, and claimed, "I was very considerate. I would spend a long time with them, making sure they were dead." Pedro Lopez said he would use a mirror to check if they were still breathing, or slit their wrists or throats to see if their blood was still pumping. If they somehow survived, he would strangle them again. "Sometimes I had to kill them all over again," he admitted. "They never screamed because they didn't expect anything would happen. They were so innocent." He also propped some of his victims up in their graves and spoke to them during bizarre and gruesome gatherings he liked to call tea parties. "My little friends like to have company. I often put 3 or 4 girls in a single hole and talked to them. It was like having a party. But after a while, because they couldn't move, I got bored and went out looking for new girls." He explained why he only chose very young girls, saying it's like eating chicken. Why eat old chicken when you can have young chicken? Pedro Lopez revealed he had wanted to rape and kill the young daughters of foreign tourists. "I often followed tourist families, wanting to take their beautiful blonde daughters. But I never got the chance. Their parents were too watchful." He explained to Leitner about the moment of death. "There is a wonderful moment, a divine moment when I have my hands around a young girl's throat. I look into her eyes and see a certain light, a spark, suddenly go out. Only those who kill know what I mean." He continued, "The moment of death is enthralling and exciting. Someday, when I am released, I will feel that moment again. I will be happy to kill again. It is my mission." He laughingly commented about his freedom, saying he was being released for good behavior, and described himself as the man of the century. "I will soon be a free man again," said Lopez. "They are releasing me on good behavior in 1998 or 1999. For much of his captivity, he feared he would be extradited to his native Colombia, where he would have faced a firing squad in a country with the death penalty. After serving 16 years of his 20-year life sentence, 51-year-old Pedro Lopez was released. He had previously been moved to solitary cell 29 in Penal Garcia de Moreno in Quito, and on January 1st, 1999, just after midnight on New Year's Eve, he was taken from his cell under heavy guard. He was handcuffed and taken in a police van followed by 2 escort vehicles for protection against possible retaliation from his victims' families, and driven to the Colombian border. There he was given a new shirt, shoes, a bottle of water, package of food, and a small amount of Colombian pesos, and set loose. The Ecuadorian government explained they were deporting him because he had no visa to stay in Ecuador. Major Lascano, governor of Ambato jail where Lopez was held for most of his sentence before his transfer to Quito, spoke about his release. "God save the children. He is unreformed and totally remorseless. This whole nightmare may start again." After this, Pedro Lopez, the monster of the Andes, disappeared. Families in Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru who heard about his freedom were fearful of their children falling victim to the serial killer, and there were numerous sightings of him with citizens calling police to ensure Lopez was recaptured. Jose Rivas, the commander of the Carchi police in Ecuador, said Lopez was seen in the mountains between Ecuador and Colombia. Minister of Prisons Pablo Figueroa was questioned by reporters about Lopez's release and admitted, "Yes, it does sound strange, but that is our law. The law of no executions or sentences longer than 20 years was passed over 100 years ago to protect presidents of Ecuador from being killed following revolutions and military coups. In the past they had been executed in horrific ways like being pulled apart by 4 horses. The law seemed humane." Interpol issued an advisory for his rearrest by Colombian authorities over a new murder in 2002, but it is unknown if he was apprehended. The whereabouts of Pedro Lopez after his release are unknown, and there are reports he is currently imprisoned whilst others state that he is a free man.